Hello, everyone. Welcome to African Esquire TV. This is a special program that we're going to be having. And the question of this program is going to be, do Abrahamic religions compromise African liberation? So before I get started, I have a number of panelists, and I have one who's going to be jumping in any moment now, hopefully. So before, well, you guys should know me. I'm Tony Street. It's my channel. So let's just go through the list. Let's go to the right, Dwayne, and then Omawale, and we'll go Slank, Dillian, and Amma. Please introduce yourselves, and please also tell what your belief system is. Do you adhere to a specific religion? And if so, what type of deities, give us some context for this discussion.
I'll start. My name is Dwayne. I'm an Pan-African activist researcher. I published 20 books on the history and the struggles of African people throughout the continent. And as far as religion, I don't really practice any religion in particular, but I come from a Catholic background. I've been in Catholic school most of my life. In fact, I'm still going to Catholic school right now. I'm a student at Berry Law School. So as I said, I don't really practice any religion in particular, but I do have a great deal of respect for all our religious belief systems. And the way I look at it is, as long as the people who practice these religions uphold, the belief systems they profess to believe in, and conduct themselves with a level of respect, that's something that I have respect for.
To you, Omawale.
Hey, peace to everyone. Peace to you, Sister Tyranny, for hosting this discussion today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brother Omawale. I'm the Vice Shanuti for the Philadelphia chapter of Afrocentricity International, which is an organization that was started back in 2011 by Dr. Amma Mazama and Dr. Malefi Asante. The organization works across 4 different axes. So it's politics, intellectual work, economic, and spiritual. We have 7 mandates in our Constitution, one of which is the continued critique of all aspects of domination that touch the African person's life. So in that regard, I think that this conversation is one of the areas, religion being an area that touches our lives, is one that we can definitely have our critiques on. And in terms of my belief system, I was born Christian. My father was actually a pastor, so I was raised in the church, born in '84. So I was in the church up until like 1994 when my father left the church and started to practice. He became a practicing Hebrew Israelite. My mother and the rest of the family didn't necessarily go in that direction with him, so didn't really practice any religion during that period of time. But when I was 19, I took my Shahada, so practiced Islam for a time. But the journey that I've been traveling, I would say, for the past, 15 years now, has been a discovery or a journey to discover self. And for me, studying our history as African people has been a big part of that journey that has taken me away from, Abrahamic belief systems. So what I believe in today, I believe in African people. I believe in our capacity for victory. I believe in our capacity for development. And I believe that we will win this war that we are engaged in.
Brother Slank.
What's up? Can you hear me? My bad. My name's Slank. I make music. I'm into researching and reading. My undergrad degree was in African history, and I've worked as a research assistant. And I don't practice any particular religion, but I'm very interested in studying how religions have been used in Africa and the history of religion in Africa. So, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it, though.
Yeah, peace and blessings to each and everyone on this call who joined us. My name is Dalian Adolfo, and I'm the co-founder of Ancestral Voices, the other half being my wife, Verona. Ancestral Voices is an educational initiative we started about 11 years ago with the explicit aim to you could call it decolonize, destigmatize, and address the falsehoods that have surrounded this topic, such that it still evokes much paranoia and fear among people when they hear the word African spirituality today. Myself, I'm a practicing Ifa and Akan traditional system practitioner. Basically, that's the philosophy that governs my life and practice.
Going to Amma, Sister Amma.
Hi, greetings. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Amma. I grew up as a Christian. Initially, actually, as a young person, I didn't really believe. Studied Black Studies and English. Those were my two majors in college. And one of the things that I personally noticed is that in my mid-20s to mid-30s, I went through this deep religious period. And it definitely had a depreciating effect on my interest on Black people and our development. I was deeply religious and studied Christianity at the graduate level, went to theology school in Canada. I am currently not practicing any religion. I do have a channel called Ile Eko Omoluabi, which really focuses on Yoruba ethics, which is based on Ifa. I am interested in the traditional spirituality of African people, but I am not a practitioner of any sort.
Brother Shakara.
Greetings. Can you hear me? Just making sure I can be heard. Thank you very much. All right. First of all, Tenda Mwadi, which is spoken in the Shona language, which is mostly spoken in Zimbabwe, simply means be thankful unto the Creator. Because give praises unto our great ancestors. Thank you very much once again, Sister Tiani, for hosting this occasion. My name is Tafadzwa Shakara Bandaka, also known as just Shakara. I'm a born and raised member of the Al-Kebulan Revivalist Movement, which is a nationalist Pan-Africanist Garveyite organization that is built upon or based upon an African-centered spiritual, cultural, and political philosophy. And so within that context, we refer to our philosophy as Al-Kebulan Livity, which means living according to the divine teachings and traditions of our mother culture. And in short, that basically means that we embrace all of our indigenous, authentic spiritual teachings and spiritual systems in a quest to kind of reclaim and restore dignity and respect, and also functionality, to our indigenous spiritual systems. And as Brother Dalian said, rescue them from the pit of misrepresentation, mischaracterization, and demonization. And so that is the perspective in which I enter this conversation. I could say more about the work that we do, which is part of the question, but we're a Pan-African organization, so we do what Pan-African organizations do, and I'll leave that there. Thank you very much.
So we also had Brother Kalanji, who was going to join us, but unfortunately he had a conflict. So unfortunately, we're going to lack the Islamic perspective on this. Also, I didn't even mention my religious beliefs. So for those who don't know, I am what you call a Christian. To me, that essentially means I'm a follower of the teachings of Yeshua. I believe that the Old Testament or the Torah's prophecies of a Messiah were fulfilled essentially through him. Anything else that you attach to that, that's what we're going to discuss, because we do acknowledge that obviously there's a real perverse history of the Christian faith and other faiths honestly being used to conquer African people. So with that, and I also do want to say to y'all, this is not a debate, this is a conversation. Everyone knows that, but I want the audience to know that so that y'all are not waiting for some fire to spark here. All right, so the first question that we're going to go to, and this is under the heading of Abrahamic religions and colonial religions. What is the history of Abrahamic religions as it relates to African people? So I will let someone, if you want to jump in, or I can jump in. Any takers?
Yeah, I'll start. Yes, I would say the history of Abrahamic religions in Africa is, certainly a very complex one, and I think something that a lot of people who haven't really looked at this history tend not to appreciate is that African people played a significant role in the founding of all three Abrahamic religions. We could look at Judaism, for example, and the Bible actually says Moses was educated in the knowledge of the Egyptians, and there's a book called Moses and Monotheism by Sigmund Freud, in which he actually argues that Moses got his religion from the Egyptian people, specifically Pharaoh Akhenaten. And what Sigmund Freud points out is that during the period of time in which the Hebrews were in Egypt, they took certain aspects from the Egyptian society and from Egyptian religion, including monotheism and circumcision. Now, when we get to Christianity, we find very early in the Christian gospel that Jesus actually spent his formative years in Egypt. Then, of course, when you look at the history of Islam, to avoid persecution in Arabia, Muhammad actually sent some of his followers to Ethiopia, where he knew they would be provided safety. So when we look at the foundation of all three religions, we find that there was a significant communication and contact with Africa, and in some cases a great deal of influence as well. There's another book that I mentioned here called Osiris and the Egyptian Resurrection, which shows a great deal of similarities between Christianity and traditional Egyptian religion, particularly the concept of the afterlife. For those of you who are really familiar with the Egyptian religion, Osiris was a judge of the afterlife, and the process of judgment in the afterlife in Egyptian religion is very similar to the concept of judgment that Christians believe in the afterlife. And I would also add as well, I think most of us are familiar with the history of colonial conquest in Africa on the part of European Christians and Arab Muslims, but I want to make the point that not all of these religions were necessarily imposed on African people through slavery and through colonialism. For example, Ethiopia has a tradition of Christianity that's almost as old as the tradition in Europe. In fact, around the same time that the Roman Empire had adopted Christianity was around the same time that the Ethiopians had adopted Christianity as well. And we see the same thing in West Africa, where we find a lot of Islamic states, but these weren't necessarily states that became Islamic because they were dominated and conquered and colonized by Arabs. In many cases, Africans in West Africa had willingly adopted Islam, and this is not to say that there weren't religious conflicts. And of course, when we look at the history of West Africa, we do find jihadist states that were imposing Islam on African people, but we also find civilizations such as Mali and Songhai, which were ruled by Islamic rulers, but these weren't necessarily jihadist states which were imposing Islam on neighboring African countries, and these weren't states that were colonized and conquered by Arabs. So I want to make the point that the history of Abrahamic religions in Africa is certainly a very complex one, and it's not something that I think can be easily simplified or reduced to generalities.
Okay, so Brother Delian had his hand up. Oh, okay, I didn't know if you were there. Do you want to go next, and then I will jump in after you?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for that, Tierney. Mine is very short. Regarding the question, what's the history of Abrahamic religions as it relates to African people? I'm going to read from, be it the supreme authority of what we call Christianity, undisputed, the Pope himself, in 1452 wrote a document. And this is what the document says. It tells us very clearly the relationship of Abrahamic religions to Africans. We grant you, kings of Spain and Portugal, by these present documents, with our apostolic authority, full and free permission to invade, search out, capture, and subjugate the Saracens, the people we call Muslims today, and pagans, the people who are also known as Black or African or even Asian today, and any other unbelievers and enemies of Christ, wherever they may be, as well as their kingdoms, duchies, counties, principalities, and other property, and to reduce their persons into perpetual slavery. That's how I know the relationship of the Abrahamic religions, particularly to African people.
Okay, so I'll jump in. one, let me be clear. For me personally, I think the Pope is not a Christian entity. I honestly think that relationship between the Pope and the church is a demonic one personally. How do you have one person that you're bowing to and these people are complicit with so many crimes? That to me is not a relationship it's not in the Bible, certainly. But if you want to talk about the history of Abrahamic religions to African people, you will go to the text. That's the founding text of Abrahamic religions. And so we're going to go to the Bible, but more specifically to the Torah. So I just want to show my screen very briefly. I don't have a whole lot to show. I just want to show this image. And let me see, am I doing this right? Yes, okay. So to me, you have to go to what the text says if you're viewing it in that light. This is, could everyone see this? Everyone let me know if you can. I'm looking to my participants. Can you guys see this?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, thanks, guys.
So, but you're bigger than the actual what you're trying to show. So I don't know if you want to reverse that. Yeah.
Brother Randall, you want to switch that around? Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you obviously would start with you could start with if you want with the beginning. And the Torah talks about Adam and Eve. That's the names that are given to them. But I think you would also want to go to Abraham because it's the Abrahamic religion. Now, Abraham was from a region called Mesopotamia. You'll see right here, which borders Africa. The region of Mesopotamia he was from was a region known as Ur, and Ur was inside of a specific region known as Chaldea. At that time, which was roughly 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, that area was known to be inhabited by Cushites. And we know that Cushites were African people. So the Sumerians was what the original name was. They were later called the Chaldeans, but these are just some images of them. Clearly, these are African people. So I'm gonna stop sharing. That's really the only thing I wanted to show and demonstrate, that you would go back to where it started, who was there at the time, and what was the relationships. There's also a number, as Dwayne pointed out, is a number of relationships that aren't discussed with people who are African in the Bible. Obviously, the nation of Israel, where it's discussed being enslaved inside of Egypt, it says they were 70 that went into Egypt, and 400 years later, 600,000 men, plus their wives and their children and their elders, left Egypt. So that lets us know, and it actually describes them as a mixed multitude. So that lets you know that these people were heavily mixed with the Egyptians. In addition, for example, there's two tribes in the original Hebrews. There was the tribe of Manasseh and the tribe of Ephraim. Those were the sons of Joseph. Joseph married an Egyptian woman, and we know that Egyptians obviously were African people at that time. You could go to Yeshua. You can go to his bloodline. He had several people, and the difficulty with the Bible is that obviously they're not in the same mind frame of us, being post-colonialism or during colonialism, where we would recognize things like race. But at that time, you have people who were outwardly stated to be African, then you had those who were implied to be African, meaning these were the people who were living in the region at the time. You would only know that from doing digging into the history. So, for example, just some of Yeshua's ancestors who we know were African. You have Rahab, who was a Canaanite woman. You have Tamar, who was a Canaanite woman. You have Bathsheba, who was a Canaanite woman. So to me, the beginning, if we're talking about the beginning, you have to go to the first instances. And I would say that you would go to the text as far as trying to understand the original relationship between African people and Abrahamic religions. So anyone?
Yeah, I would love to weigh in if you permit me.
Go ahead.
Okay, so so when it comes to the history of Abrahamic religions and as it relates to African people, I come down along the side of the historical facts. Dalian just presented the papal bull that was issued by the Pope for the Christian church to come in as an invading force. But whether it was Judaism, Christianity, and or Islam, they all entered the continent as invading forces, right? So if I'll share my screen just briefly. And like I said, I didn't really prepare a lot for this, but since you went to Genesis, I'd just like to go to Genesis as well. So let me know when you can see my screen. Can you guys see my screen? Or does Randall need
Yes,
to?
bro.
It's small, but we can.
Yes, sir.
Y'all, okay, Randall, can you make my screen? Okay, y'all can see it. All right, cool. So if you go to Genesis 9, verses 22 through 27, I'll read for you. It says, "And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told it to his brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah woke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall be he until his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord of God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And then he said, God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant." Right? So I'll just stop sharing there. But I wanted to bring that up because you went to the book. But this foundational myth, referred to as the Hamidic Myth, when you examine the mythological three sons of Noah that supposedly made up the three races of the ancient world or the biblical world, has been used as the justification for invasion of the African continent, dispossession of Black people, and it's been used by all three branches of the Abrahamic tradition. In fact, each of these, like, because I want to respond to what Dwayne said at the beginning in terms of these being African products. I disagree with that, like, vehemently, and the reason why I say that is because, like modern day production, there's lots of raw materials that are sourced from the African continent, and then they're taken to Europe or to different countries. They're processed, and then they come back as finished goods. Well, it's the same thing with these colonizer religions. You can find the raw materials for these religions on the African continent, but they were fully processed in Europe. They were fully processed in the Arabian Peninsula. And when they came back as finished goods, they came back as instruments, cultural instruments to conquer and dispossess African people of their land and dehumanize African people. So that is the history that the facts point to, and not necessarily. I'll stop there because we have to play nice, so I'll stop there.
We're not playing this. We're having a respectful conversation. Let me give you a follow up to that though. So you went to the curse of Ham. We know that that has been used obviously against African people. Where, two questions in regards to that. One, where does it specifically say? For example, my belief is that all people had to come from African people. So how do we know that Ham was actually African, whereas his brothers and sisters weren't? And two, why do we accept that when he does not curse Ham, he curses Canaan? And Noah had three other sons. One of the sons was came from the Cushites, and then the other one was who the Bible says, I think it was Mizraim. That was the Egyptians, and there was another one. I think it was Put. Those we know are also three African nations. So even if we were to take it that Ham was African, that would be one out of three African nations. So you can respond to that specifically. I don't want to.
Yeah.
May I?
Yeah, actually, let's rotate.
Did you want me to respond, or I mean,
I wanted to kind of.
Let's just start on responding. If you have something to add, you add it.
You said Noah had three other sons, but Ham is the father of four sons. So to me, the confusion might lie in trying to identify this as a historical lineage as opposed to a political text, which is designed to define Israel's enemies and who is not. And so in saying Ham is the father of these four nations, Cush, Egypt, Put, Canaan, they identify four people as specifically Black people and as other and separate from the children of Shem. And then they follow that up by saying, blessed be Shem and his descendants, cursed be Canaan, and he is to serve Shem. These are not historical texts. And if you look at throughout the text how the Canaanites are discussed and treated, what you see here is a justification for the subjugation and the dispossession of Black people off their land. And so how do we know they're Black? I don't know that they're real people. We know that the writers of the text identify them as the Black people who we're colonizing.
Yes, and I see what you're saying. I guess what I'm saying is, why do we believe the colonists' interpretation
Because they wrote the text.
Of the text? You know, whereas the text. So again, if you look at how people come out of being Black, like I'm of the belief that Noah would have to have been African, and his sons would all have to have been African. So I'm wondering, why do we, whenever we're going to the original, we're not talking about we're going to get to colonization very soon, but why do we go to what happened before and assume that what the slave master said, and we know that he's not the one who wrote the text, that must be the original intent behind the text?
Because if Noah is the father and he curses one son and condemns one son to serve another, and they're both African, the text is essentially saying that a group of Africans enslave other Africans. That seems a little better to you, baby, but that doesn't seem plausible to me, and nor does it erase the fact that a group of people are being cursed and their lands are being taken.
Okay, so you have a problem. You have a problem with curses, period, basically.
I think it's not plausible that they are both Africans, because it's not supposed to be an actual lineage. What they're supposed to represent are nations. These people represent nations.
Yeah, can I respond as well? Because you did initially ask me to respond, but my response is very similar to Sister Alma's. For one, I don't take the Bible or the story of Noah as a historical document. It's a cultural product, and when we talk about the curse of Ham, we're talking about the mythology that has been used to animate the aggression of each of these traditions against African people. Right? It's been used for the justification of dispossessing us of our land, dehumanizing us, and demonizing us, and that practice has been ongoing since the entrance of these traditions onto the African continent. And I think it's important for us to recognize that, which is why I say that these are not African cultural products. These are products where the raw materials were sourced, right? We know monotheism and elements that you find in each of these traditions come out of the African continent. But you got the raw materials, you process them, you politicize them, and then you use them as justification when they came back as finished goods to dominate and dispossess us of our land. And I think that you can't get around that, because that is the history.
Okay, I'm going to respond, and I'm going to let the other two get in.
Yeah, I want to. Sorry, go ahead, sis.
Yeah, let me just respond, and I'm going to let the other two get in, because I don't want to dominate or stay too much on this one point. But I think this is okay. So we obviously, if you're a person who's not of an Abrahamic religion, you don't believe that that text is accurate. So I accept that everyone who's on this panel is saying that we don't even subscribe to that's what happened. But we're speaking from when African people first encountered Abrahamic religions. So if you're going to say this text, which we know has been I would think you would all agree has been misused, regardless of what you believe. If we're going to say that this text is going to be the reference point, I think that we have to be very careful in not propagating the ideas that we know were put in after the fact, because that is going to do nothing to actually get to the original intent. So if you're going to talk to African people who subscribe to those religions, and you're saying, well, this is what he said, he cursed him, and so therefore that means that the whole African race is cursed, and this is what the book is that you believe. That's not what it's saying, number one. Number two, again, I believe that there's nothing in there that's saying that one tribe is African and one's not. So it's clear to me that at that time, Shem would have to have also been African. Shem is the one who Israel came out of. So that's the point I'm just trying to make before Brother Shakarab go in, is that when we're trying to talk among our brothers and sisters, I think that it's okay to critique and point out things, but whenever there's making a differentiation from saying this is what someone wrote and this is how it was interpreted and this is how it was used, that we have to be willing to concede, okay, maybe this is how you're going to apply it to your life, and maybe this is how it's been applied to the whole world, instead of making them to have believed the original lie that was created by the white system. So I'm going to let Brother Shakara get in, and then we're going to go to us.
So don't worry. Thank you. An interesting exchange. I'm gonna just go straight to the question, yeah, and just kind of begin where I normally begin conversations like these. We have to look at what Abrahamic religions are. Yeah, Abrahamic religions are a set of spiritual ideals, beliefs, yeah, and dogma that are associated with the stories or the tales or the relationship of a particular ancestral line, yes, with their God, and agreements that were made with God from this specific ancestral line. Yeah. And so, because the religions are totalitarian, the idea is that this is the only true way to get to God. Inherent within that claim is a judgment about spiritual traditions that don't fit that mold. Yeah. That's a reality. So, for example, we're talking about Moses and the fact that he was educated in Kemet, yeah, in Egypt. But the story ends with the God of Abraham casting judgment, yeah, on the people of Kemet because of their spiritual ideals, because they were said to be worshiping gods other than the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? And so we have terminology that is born out of that consciousness, terminology that such as pagan, terminology such as heathen, terminology such as kuffar, terminology such as shirk, yeah? And these terms have been used to characterize African people and African culture. The question we have to ask ourselves is, do we have African people without African culture? And is the mere presence of African people in an endeavor enough to make it African? There were Africans there in 1776 at the inception of this nation state that we call the United States of America. It doesn't, and made contributions to its establishment. It doesn't make America any more of an African nation because of that fact. And I think that oftentimes we begin these conversations with the expectation that brothers and sisters treat the text and the ideas of the religion as they might put it, what was there at the inception. But I think we need to recognize that what is being asked for in that instance is a courtesy that was not afforded that was not afforded to people that lived outside of that Abrahamic lens by the people that let me start that sentence again. Excuse me. We're asking for a courtesy that people that follow Abrahamic religions do not give to the traditions, and African traditions in particular, that are characterized as kuffar, shirk, pagan, and heathen. Yeah. And so I think we need to bear that in mind, that our indigenous spiritual systems have universally been characterized by these religions and their adherents as these things. And we're suffering from that today. A part of the self-hatred that we've been induced into as African people is not just because of how we look, black skin and thick nose and big lips. It's our very beingness, our culture. Yes. And in particular, our spiritual traditions that have been demonized.
Okay, thank you, Becca Shakur. Sorry, we're going to get to you, but I want to let Slang get in before we get to you, okay? And then we're going to go to the next topic, y'all, because we can stay on this all day.
All right. Only thing I really want to add is just like Dwayne said, monotheism, Judaism have a connection to Egypt and originate in Egypt and everything. And I would just say that the whole concept of the Middle East is a colonial European concept. The Middle East, like geographically, ethno-linguistically, is linked to Africa. And as Ali Mazrui talks about in the African Triple Heritage, as Dr. Charles Finch has a lecture on it, but they call it Africa's Northeast Extension. So I would just argue that the religions and traditions that come out of this part of the world are also, that is Africa. Only, yeah, that's basically what I'm saying.
Can I respond to without it turning into a debate. But there was.
I don't know, but let's let Brother Dalian get in first, and then you can very quickly.
Yes, Brother Mwale, mine is actually very short, and it's dead on what Brother Mwale was saying, Sister Tierney, because right at the very top of the questionnaire list that you sent us it says very clearly, this is not a debate, but a constructive and open conversation. And so far, each time Brother Mwale and Sister Amma have made a point, you felt the need to rebut that point. So now, maybe perhaps you are not aware, but inadvertently, you are turning it into a debate yourself. So, if it's a conversation, we're all allowed to have our own opinion. You don't need to prove it or rebut it. We should just let the conversation flow. Because, it's an opinion. You keep saying, I believe, I believe. We're now no longer working in the realm of fact. We're working in the realm of personal opinion. We're all allowed to believe anything we want. But if we keep doing this rebutting thing, it's just going to disintegrate into a debate straight on. So I'm just
absolutely. Listen, Brother Dalian, and I completely feel what you're saying. I feel what you're saying. I want to be clear. This is a conversation, not a debate, meaning we respect each other's beliefs. So as I said in what I was responding, that I concede that you do not believe this system, but this is what we're going to talk about in this type of mainframe. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a conversation. You should absolutely respond to me if you feel like you're going to, and if you should absolutely respond to someone else, but it should be constructive, and that if you feel like something is wrong. So for example, if I say something that you feel like is completely ignorant about your belief system, please correct me, because like we said, we're being constructive. And I wanted to talk specifically about the ham thing I already had on my list, because that's something that I specifically think is hurtful whenever we're trying to come together. And we can't discuss whether or not we're going to regard something that was taken from a white man and misconstrued as being something that's attached to Black people today. So if I introduce the debate spirit into there, I apologize. But by all means, if you feel like I am misrepresenting your beliefs, you have every right to come and say, well, Tierney, have you considered this? Because to me, that's not a debate. To me, that is a constructive conversation. I think I kept within the realms of that, but if you don't, by all means.
not to worry, sis. We're very clear. Not to worry at all. I was just highlighting the fact in case it wasn't explicit to all. So, Brother Mwale, please make your point.
No, I appreciate you as the elder statesman on this conversation. Bringing that to the table, that this is a presentation of facts rather than an articulation of beliefs. So I definitely appreciate that, because if not, it can very easily turn into kind of like a head button situation. But just wanted to respond to Brother Slank in terms of not necessarily even the monotheistic claim, because we've already stated that all of the raw materials, including monotheism, comes out of Africa. But I was more so pertaining to his assessment that what's referred to as the Arabian Peninsula, or referred to today as the Middle East, is northeastern Africa. Well, maps are political instruments. So throughout history, even before the colonial period, at one point in time, the Arabian Peninsula was referred to as Southeastern Asia. So it depends on whose view or lens you're looking to. But as it relates to the culture and the cultural products that come out of this area, the Arabian Peninsula can be looked at in a similar fashion to Spain. They both were once part of the African tectonic plate, if you refer to that, if you ascribe to that particular theory. But just like the culture of Spain, right, is very different than what we see. If you look at Sheikh Anta Diop's The Cultural Unity in Black Africa, the culture of Spain is very different than what you see coming out of the African context. Also, the culture of the Arabian Peninsula, being on the other side of the Red Sea, the conditions and things that birthed the ideas out of that area were very different. Much of what were the founding kind of like beliefs that established civilization along the Nile Valley did not come from across the Red Sea. It actually came from the interior up the Nile Valley. Right, so those cultures are very different. So if you look at the history of Nile Valley society, they talked about the so-called Hyksos and people from over on the other side of the Red Sea being invading forces and barbaric, to use a term from today's kind of like political.
Low to miserable Asiatics.
Exactly. So like you can't then take that claim and say, well, the Arabian Peninsula is actually just a part of Africa, because you could then say, well, Spain is a part, because they're both on the African tectonic plate. So I think we have to be careful with making those types of claims to support religious belief.
All right, so what I would say to that, this is not a response, if you think I'm trying to debate, I would say that for the audience, that's one of the things that you should definitely go back and research. And let me also say, like, although I am responding individually, anyone who if you feel someone said something and you want to respond to that person, by all means, I'm just the moderator, so I get the first, I'm the talker. So by all means, so let's go to the next topic, everyone. So the next topic is, if I can find it quickly. So when did these faiths become decolonized? So I don't know who wants to jump in at this, because there might be a discrepancy between us as far as when it became decolonized. If I'm hearing some of you correctly, they've always been colonized. So I don't know, anyone want to take this first?
I do.
No, my sister, please go forward.
Go ahead, Emma. Go ahead.
Sister Alma has her hand up.
Okay. All right. So I think to your point earlier, we should absolutely start with Abraham. And I think the colonial aspect of it is not something that comes in later. It's not something that comes in with the Spanish or the Portuguese or the Romans. It is endemic to the Abrahamic story itself. So I want to address who Abraham is. So earlier we pointed out that Abraham is from the land of Ur of the Chaldeans, and there was a reference to time, but the age of the Chaldeans is between the 10th and the 6th century BC, right before the Babylonian period. And I don't think we are justified in thinking that that is at that moment in history an African kingdom or dominated by African people. This does not mean that there was not some earlier period when it was, but it certainly is not between the 10th and the 6th century. What then we have to consider is that Abraham is not indigenous to the land of Canaan. He is a man who's coming outside of Canaan. He is called by his deity to conquer land that the deity specifically says belongs to other people. So in Genesis, it says, on that day, that is the day that he calls Abraham, he says, to your descendants, I will give this land. This Eurasian man who comes from the Persian Gulf, I will give you this land from the river of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates, the land of the Canaanites, Kenizzites, Hittites, all the ites. I'm not going to keep listing them, but there are a lot of ites. Now, I think, again, to the point I was making, who are these people historically? Less important than what they symbolize for Israel. And what Israel is trying to do is justify their political domination of the people of the land. So there's a later reference in King in which you see what the consequence of, I am giving you the land that belongs to other people. I have cursed the ancestor of these people means. So in Kings, Solomon, having engaged in a battle with the people of that land, in which the Bible said they were nearly exterminated. So the Bible follows up by saying there were still people left. So it's not all of them, right? Were exterminated. So earlier it says they were nearly exterminated. There were still people left. Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivitites, Jebusites. Solomon conscripted the descendant of these people remaining in the land, whom Israel could not exterminate, to serve as slave labor, as it is to this day. Now, scholars believe that these texts were written about, 7th century or later. So what I imagine here is 7th century BC, by the way, is that there are people on the land, they're enslaved to the Israelites. And there's a need to explain, well, when did this happen? Well, it happened because Solomon did it. And how do we morally justify this? Because their ancestors were cursed. It is a back way of justifying something they've already done, which is to.
Oh, she was going ham.
What's going in? Come on, man.
Pun intended.
How funny. We got a freezing going
Oh,
on. I guess
Can I jump in?
I try to keep the balance and go between perspectives. So anyone want to? I mean, I guess I can follow up if I don't want to cut her off. I feel like she's going to unfreeze any second. But okay, she's coming back.
Okay. So is that
okay? Here we go.
Okay, all right. So I apologize. Now let me just jump right back where I was. To the extent that we think they are not presenting an accurate history, this is against their text, and they have identified a distinction between them and other people, a distinction between them, the descendants of Ham, and Egypt. Egypt comes up again in the life of Abraham. Egypt comes up again in the person of a slave of Abraham and his wife, Hagar. Abraham has this promise from God. I'm going to give you this land, but he has no descendants. And his wife gets this bright idea. I am going to give you my slave. So let me just read the text for you. Now, Sarah, Abraham's wife, had not borne no children. She had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abraham, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go to sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. And this is agreed upon. Now, I'm making an assumption that all of us, given our background as descendants of enslaved African, don't think that any kind of relationship between a master and a slave can be consensual. So Hagar's body is used by Abraham, this Egyptian Black woman, who subsequently does not inherit the promise, because Sarah goes on to have a child, and that is the child, Isaac, who inherits the land, and Hagar and her son are sent away. 33 times in the Old Testament, 32 times in the Old Testament, 1 time in the New Testament. So 32 times in the Old Testament. They're very specific. Whose God is this? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are specifically rooting themselves in a lineage, and they're saying you're not part of it. Now, you might think, and some people might think, so sometimes when I talk about the Old Testament, people say, well, that's just Old Testament. But how does Jesus consider, or what evidence do we have that Jesus also might have thought this way, or at least some of the people who wrote the New Testaments might have thought this way? In Matthew 15, we have a situation in which the Canaanite woman approaches Jesus for a miracle. And he says, let me quote the Bible again, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. And then he adds, when she keeps begging, is it right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dog? To which she replied, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall off the master's table. Now, because of this response, he decides to grant her wishes. But I want us to keep in mind 2 things. First, he calls her a dog. And this is very consistent with what you see throughout the Old Testament, this dehumanization of the Canaanite people, this idea that they are unclean, that any kind of references to them is unclean. Even those people, by the way, who happen to be of Canaanite descent, who are in Jesus' lineage, which tend to be women, are of ill repute. And there is a constant warning. Like, the reason Israel keeps getting in trouble with Yahweh is because they keep consorting with these Canaanite women that God keeps, or the God of Israel keeps saying to stay away from. So in their self-understanding, I want to say one more thing about it. When he says, I was only here for the house of Israel, he's saying, I'm not here for you. I'm here for Israel. I'm here for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, I don't believe that the Bible is a text of one opinion. And so clearly there are other people in the Bible who sort of figure out ways to bring in Gentiles, quote unquote, into the story of Israel. But one of the things that I find interesting when you look at the Bible is the way that Bible kind of tells on itself. So you have this text at a time when a whole bunch of people who are not Israelites are now part of the religion. And you've got this sort of embarrassing moment where Jesus calls a non-Israelite a dog, which kind of, for me, suggests that there was definitely this idea that the Messiah wasn't for you. And if you look at the Old Testament, it's a Jewish Messiah who's there to solve Jewish things. He's not there for you. He is the descendant of a Eurasian man who was sent from Chaldea to the land of Canaan to conquer the land where other people were living. And those people are specifically described as the son of the man who perennially is deemed to be cursed and perennially identified with Black people. Therefore, the idea that it became colonized is a misnomer. It was colonized from the onset. It's a colonial religion.
Okay, so clearly this is going to be hard not to argue because I disagree with almost everything you said, Sister Alma, but I want to let Dwayne and Slank get in if they want to, and if not, I'll jump in.
Yeah, right.
Or Slank, I'm sorry, then we'll go to Amawale, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So, in my view, if we're trying to pinpoint when these religions actually became colonial religions, I think the only way to really pinpoint that date is when these religions were used by colonizers to enslave and conquer other people. And I think when we look at the history of Christianity and Islam, particularly, they didn't really start out as colonial religions. For example, when you look at the preachings of Jesus, Jesus wasn't, so much concerned with conquering and colonizing other people. He was speaking on, certain social ills that he was dealing with in his day. Issues such as poverty, wealth inequality, religious hypocrisy. Those were sort of the kind of things that Jesus was preaching against, but it wasn't necessarily a colonial doctrine at the onset. How it became a colonial doctrine is because the Romans initially persecuted Christians. Then they realized Christianity could be used to further a colonial agenda. And I think we have to be clear on the fact that Europeans were trying to colonize the entire world and conquer the rest of the world before Christianity. Alexander the Great is known for conquering the known world in his day, and obviously the Roman Empire at that time was the largest empire in the world. So Europeans were already seeking to conquer and to colonize. So Christianity became just another tool that they were able to use for that conquest. But as I said, when you look at what Jesus was preaching in the New Testament, it wasn't necessarily a colonial doctrine in the sense that he was trying to colonize and conquer other people. And I think Islam, we see a similar type of thing taking place too, where when you look at the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, he didn't initially set out to conquer and colonize other people. And in some respects, Muhammad was actually a reformer in his day. One of the reforms that's been credited to Muhammad was abolishing female infanticide among the people of Arabia. So we see the same thing in Islam, where Muhammad started out as being a reformer, and then over time that the religion of Islam was used as a tool for our Arab colonizers as a spread through conquest. But I think just objectively, when you look at the formation of these religions, they didn't start out as religions that were necessarily seeking to subjugate or to colonize anyone. And that's my view.
All right, go ahead, Amawale, then I'm gonna jump in.
And did Slink want to go in? Because
I was trying to keep it balanced, like go between.
It's all balanced. We all Pan-Africanists here. We just sharing our perspectives. It's not a debate.
I mean, yeah, I can go if you want.
Anyone can go.
All right, I would just say, I pretty much agree with what Dwayne said. Like these religions, I feel at least started in Africa, and I would say once Europeans and other groups of people started to take things out and change things and alter things, and use them to suit their own like colonialist purposes, is when they got colonized, I would say. So like, and with like early Islam, for example, a lot of the groups that they were conquering in the beginning were non-African groups. Like when they came into Egypt, for example, they were, as like Du Bois talks about in World in Africa, they were displacing the Byzantines. So it wasn't, and how Islam spread to a lot of Africa was not through conquest, but through other Africans spreading it and things like that. So I would say once Europeans mainly got hold of things is when these religions became colonialized, but African people still used them for revolutionary purposes after that, at different times. So yeah.
All right, Amawale, you go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that we have to be very careful when we are dancing between kind of like cultural or religious mythology and actual historical fact. There is no point when these faiths become colonized. They're colonial instruments from their inception. The concept of Christianity headquartered in Rome, as Brother Dalian stated from the very beginning, in terms of its interface with the continent. I'm talking about Christianity, right? The religion, because that's what we're referring to. Its interface is on historical record documented as the Papal Bull that signed in 1443 that gives justification to wage wars of enslavement and dispossession upon African people. Right, so you can't separate that. From the Jewish perspective, I mean, it's documented all throughout the Old Testament that this is a cultural instrument used for groups of people who descend from the Arabian Peninsula, which is an area where the people who historically have been from there have been very insecure. They're nomadic people. It wasn't a place that was very friendly to agriculture, right? So if you're running from a place, I mean, even if you believe in like the historical, or not historical, even if you believe in the mythology of the Bible, it tells you Joseph comes into Egypt and then brings his family in because they're escaping famine. Right. So historically, these people who lived on the other side of the Red Sea were in an insecure position, and they're looking at their neighbors on the other side of the Red Sea as, oh man, they living it up. That's the land of milk, honey, and plenty. And in their mind, their God says, hey, there's something wrong with them. So even though they're welcoming you in, because as Brother Slank said at the beginning, the Muslims who were being persecuted in the Arabian Peninsula were able to go into Ethiopia and be embraced. So even though they're embracing you, even though they have a history and cultural practices that are far longer than yours, right? You go in and say, these people are demonic, these people are not human, and my God has given me the right to steal and slave. And you can't get away from that because those are the historical facts. Even if you look at when Islam penetrates the African continent, and I'm referring to Egypt. So in the 31st year of what's referred to as Muhammad's Hijra, right? Because Egypt falls in 646, but the first treaty that's ever signed on record is signed between so-called Christian Nubia, who was Christianized during the period of Roman Byzantine. So the first treaty is signed between Christian Nubia and Islamic Egypt, and in the treaty is where they introduce the concept of a slave tribute to the African continent. So as a part of that treaty, the Nubians were required to supply an annual supply of slaves, right, on an annual basis to the caliphate. And everywhere the caliphate went across the Sahel and down the eastern borders of what's referred to as the Zanj region, they instituted this slave tribute, right? So we can't get around these cultural products or religions being instruments of conquest used to justify, used to first dispossess, then dehumanize a people and justify the doing of that by saying this God in the sky told us that our people are supposed to take from your people. We can't get around that. Everything else is just mythology. If you deal with the historical fact, the record is plain.
All right, so I'm gonna break script because I think what is happening here that is unhelpful to African people, African liberation, and I'm sure all of us are in organizations. It's difficult whenever, first of all, I've heard both of you, Amma and Amawale, misquote the Bible a number of times, and I'm not even going to go back because, like you said, number one, it's not supposed to be a debate, but number two, I don't debate concepts that are sacred, you know, to me, just the same way that I wouldn't expect to debate concepts that were sacred to you. From whatever religion that you subscribe to. So I'll leave it at that. Although I do want to, one thing that's not in the Bible that I want people to be clear on is that the Chaldeans who were before them, the Sumerians who Abraham comes out of, that was 5,000 BC to 4,000 BC. That was long before the Roman Empire. And that's something that y'all could just look up yourself. Don't take any of our word for anything. When we're talking about colonization, the fact that y'all are conflating something that was white nationalist, something that was done for power, something that was done for money, something that was done for, and going from the Bible says, is the root to all evil, the love of money. Conflating that to a religious belief that you don't have to believe in, you don't have to subscribe to. Ultimately, all of us, we subscribe to different faiths, and that's the whole point of this panel. But conflating the two, I'm kind of disappointed that this is like where we are as a people, because when I look at what happened at the Council of Nicaea versus when I look at what happened inside of the Torah, you know, and by the way, I mean, this is not the time to, there's no time to me to dissect different people's beliefs, because I would never want to go into a certain faith or a people and say, oh, your God said this 3,000 years ago. What were you thinking? What was he thinking? Me not having the same understanding that they have of that particular thing. So this is not to debate that, but to me, to conflate what happened whenever Europeans came together and said, those people, based on the color of their skin, nothing else, we're going to take their land, we're going to subjugate them to us, we're going to take their children, their people, send them across the seas. That's crazy to me. Colonization is the biggest crime to all African people, and we have to keep our target, like we have to keep our weapon on the target. The target is this global system. No global system came out of any Abrahamic religion or any traditional religion. So that's honestly my take from this. That's my spill. I mean, you guys can do with it what you want, but I just hope that we are clear in differentiating that what was done when people painted pictures of Africans being barbaric, that was something that deserved a certain treatment, and I would never conflate that with anything that happened before it or after it. We've always had wars. We've always had people conquering each other. We've always had things that required for our people to stay inside of this clan, stay inside of that clan, and operate in that type of way. We've always had those types of things, but I would never compare any of those things, no matter what inhumane thing came out of those wars. I would never compare that to the global system of white supremacy that has our people dying, starving to this very day. So anyone can jump in.
Yes, it's difficult to cover it after such an impassioned statement, but I do have to firstly pronounce the ashe after everything that Sister Amma Bookman said in answer to this question, in the opening, but also to look at it in terms of what, as Brother Umwai is asking, what is colonization, and in the sense of the fact that if we kind of merge this question with the previous question and look at the impact, that it had whenever we were adopted these religions or were indoctrinated into them, right? So we have all religious tradition venerates a group of ancestors, although some condemn the veneration of ancestors, right, whilst venerating their own ancestors. And I'm saying that if we take a lesson from Baba Amilcar Cabral, who teaches that to seek to oppress a people is essentially the quest, to destroy their cultural production. And a lot of that cultural production is based upon your understanding of self and peoplehood that is inextricably linked to your ancestors. And when we look at the role that Abrahamic religions have played among African people, we can see a consistent trend of the displacement of the people's ancestors and the replacement of those ancestors with the ancestors and the descendants of Abraham. And we can look all over the continent, and sometimes to the extent that Africans manufacture lineage in order to be associated with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Muhammad, and the Sahaba, right? This is done because there is seen to be prestige associated with being associated with that lineage, and this is not because, in my humble opinion, and with all due respect, this is not because some group of people way down the line in the future past Abraham impose that upon the religion. We started speaking about Abraham and Moses, and I'm saying that the story that in the text itself is a story of God, the God of Abraham, demonstrating his superiority, demonstrating his power over the pagans, over the heathens, over the kuffar, the disbelievers. And disbelief in and of itself is punishable by death as far as the God is concerned. Yeah. So I'm saying that we have to bear that in mind. So I don't think we can. I think the premise of the question needs work in the sense of when did they become colonized. The question is, when did we become colonized by it? That is the question that I think we need to be asking.
Can I ask my sister Tyranny a question?
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, just so it's good for us to be in agreement on definitions. So, how would you define the core activity of a colonial enterprise? Like, how would you define colonization? Like, what is it the act of doing?
Well, and maybe I should have been more specific in the question. I kind of assumed that we were going to take the wider understanding of colonialism as being the context. But colonization to me is, the definition is literally you have a people who are going to go into a certain country and are going to make that country a colony. They're going to extract their resources. They're going to pervert the culture. They're going to exercise power over a foreign people from another colony. So that is the general definition of colonialism.
Okay, so I think we're in agreement. If I was to shorten your definition, that colonization is the dispossession of land, culture, and resources of a people by another group of people. Correct?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So when we look, what was that?
Sorry, and I think also that, because I think you're going to follow up on the question, I would ask for our participants who feel this way to explain, and specifically the churches that we know that did not come out of European colonization that are in Africa. So, for example, the Ethiopian Coptic Church, the Egyptian Coptic Church, there's another one in Eritrea. So, I think would be better keeping our analysis to, at least in this question, to how that was colonized faith, if we're going to proceed. But go ahead.
Okay, so if we're, can I share my screen just briefly here? So if we're talking about colonization and we agree on the premise that it is the act of dispossessing the people of land, culture, and resources, like one group doing it to another, that is actually what's written out in specific detail all throughout the Bible. I mean, you don't have to get out of the book of Genesis. Now, this particular map, please take it with a huge grain of salt, because remember, this is based upon mythology, but it's a map that comes from Bible.net that supposedly gives the historical Japheth, Shem, and Ham, right? So it's very clear when you talk about Canaan, you see this red box here where it has all the, all the names of the different Canaanite tribes. It's very clear who they're referring to in terms of whose lands they are going to dispossess, whose cultures they are going to destroy, and whose resources they are going to claim for themselves, right? And each of these faiths, right, have cultural centers, right? So if you look at Islam, its cultural center, right, or its hub would be Mecca, right? So it's the aggression is emanating from that space. If it's Judaism, its cultural center would be Jerusalem. If it's so-called Christianity, its cultural center would be Rome, right? So brother Great House, brother Mark shared this on Twitter the other day. I thought it was a great map. It shows, this is I think this map was printed in 1895. It's showing kind of like the conquest of the African continent, right? The so-called scramble for Africa. Now, the yellow portion across the top is all of the so-called Mohammedan, right, colonized areas, right? So, but what you see along the bottom, when you look at all these red dots, the green marks so-called heathens, and all the red dots that you see are missionary stations, right? So if we know how colonialization worked, it was a process of first mercenaries, right? Then missionaries, and then finally merchants followed. So the missionary or proselytizing enterprise that you see in Christianity is a colonial activity. I'm there, and in fact, the fact that it follows behind the mercenaries means that the warrior class has now been wiped out. So I'm here as a missionary to teach the orphans this new way of life. And what am I teaching them? I'm teaching them that their culture is demonic, that their ancestors ate each other, that their ancestors, brothers and sisters, were having sex with each other. There's a great book. I have it right here. It's called The Man-Eating Myth. Everywhere the colonial enterprise went and 19th century anthropologists went, they came up with this, I don't want to curse, they came up with this myth that these people were cannibals, like eating each other. But there's no, so you cannot separate these institutions of conquest from what they are as it relates to their interface with African people. There is no getting around it. That's what I'm saying. If you try to make it about your belief, then you get away from the facts, because there's going to be lots of inconvenient facts that go against what you believe.
Well, no, can I ask you some follow-up? And I seen your message in the chat that you didn't misquote scripture. You misquoted scripture when you said that the Israelis went into Egypt because it was scarce. If you know the whole context, that whole region was scarce at the time. Joseph had a prophecy. He went to Egypt and ahead of time warned the Egyptian Pharaoh that there's going to be scarcity. So because of that, the Egyptian Pharaoh entrusted Joseph to watch over the storehouse, meaning to save up grains and everything, so that whenever the famine happened, Egypt would be in a position to basically be okay. So whenever Israelis went, they went to Joseph, who was in charge of the storehouse, and asked him, hey, can I have some food? It was his brothers. There's a whole union. That's the context I was talking about, reading misquoted scripture. So question, does that change anything if Abraham was African? My stance is he is African. Your stance is he isn't. If he were African, does that change anything? Do Abrahamic religions still, are they still colonized religion? Hold up, are they still colonized religions if this were an African religion? And in addition, do you still, well, no, I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
I think, and Brother Delian may be able to assist here, but we have to really look at what we're defining as African, in that respect. And I think that oftentimes, there's a specificity applied to Abrahamic religions. We understand what Abrahamic religion is, and we are able to even specifically distinguish between the Abrahamic religions. But we want African tradition and African spirituality and African culture to be all things to all people. And I think that is problematic. But I think there are some correlations that we find in African culture that not only would define Abrahamic religions and traditions outside of those traditions and cultures, but that the Abrahamic religions themselves define themselves outside of those traditions and cultures. So I don't believe that just because an African does something, that it is inherently African. We have to look at the cultural milieu, that has contributed to that creation and that development in the first place anyway. And I submit to brothers and sisters that if it was indeed African, that Oduduwa and Orunmila would be just as worthy of veneration as Abraham and Isaac, that Shaka Zulu, Moombe, and Kikuyu would be just as worthy of veneration as Noah and Adam. I think that, and if we look at how African spiritual traditions relate to each other, that tends to be the case. That my ancestors are not necessarily superior to yours, and we can share in the fruits of nature, because ultimately we are dealing with harmony with nature and not the superiority of any god over another.
So your answer is no, that doesn't change your analysis, even if they were African people.
No,
okay.
It's not. Sorry. So just to clarify, it's not whether the characters are African or not. It's the dominant philosophy and worldview that comes out of the tradition.
Okay, so you're saying that if the philosophy, I'm a little confused, but I don't want to harp too much on this because I want Amma to be able to talk, and Dalian wants to talk too. So please be brief, because I want to switch gears and talk about modern times.
You're on mute, sis.
So we talk about Egypt and we talk about North Africa's willing acceptance, embrace of Christianity. But I think one of the things that gets missed in the conversation is at the time of the rise of Christianity, Egypt and North Africa is a Roman province, and are very much influenced by the Roman imperial culture that already exists there. So they're not accepting Christianity in a vacuum. Egypt is a foreshadow of its African self. We've already have non-African kings and queens at this point in Egypt. Also, were the Christians always freely embracing? The Christians tend to understate how much they pressured and bullied people into accepting their religion. But we have a very specific case of a female philosopher in the 4th century named Hypatia, who is stoned to death in Egypt in front of a church by a mob of Christians. And so here we have a very specific case in which the Christians are dominating and imposing their religious ideas. This is not something that is chosen freely. Let us move now quickly to East and the Sudan. We have to very quickly quote a Muslim historian, Ibn Khaldun, who talks about the Nubians' conversion to Islam. And he specifically says, this is a Muslim writing in the 14th century, with the Nubians' conversion to Islam, the payment of the jizya, that is the tax that in the Quran says that you can impose on non-Muslim people, ceased. So did they convert because they wanted to, or because they were being pressured and dominated by the nearby sultanate and they wanted to stop paying the jizya? And upon their collapse and their acceptance of Islam, what you have is hordes of Arabs coming through the continent, going down up to Lake Chad, and sometimes maybe trading, but also engaging in violence. And I don't want to go too much into that, but if it comes up again, I'll talk about what some of the kings who converted to Islam experienced as Africans converts to Islam.
Okay, Brother Dalian, the question, I remember, forget the question, original question.
I think it was when exactly did these religious faiths become colonized?
No, the question was if does it change anything if Abraham was black?
That was my question for you, but if you do want to answer that, you can.
I definitely wanted to answer, but Sister Amma.
Yeah, we gotta move on though, y'all. I want to talk about the modern context, but I want to let Brother Dalian. You can. If you can be quick, you can answer.
All right.
Go ahead,
So,
Brother Dalian.
No,
No, I'm letting Brother Dalian go first, but go ahead.
All right, go ahead, Brother Dalian, go ahead.
Yeah, my answer to that one is even simpler than anything. No, it doesn't matter. Yeah, if black people are offended by white people doing blackface, we need to stop trying to turn whiteface into blackface. This person we call Abraham was a man who came and gave his wife under false pretenses to another man to sleep with his wife, pretending the wife was his sister. So if we're going to ask exactly at which point did religious faith become colonized, you see, this is one of these loopy questions. It's like a computer loop. It has no beginning and an end. None of us were there for anyone to prove conclusively when anything started. Yes, so for me, this question is just open-ended for the sake of being open-ended. What we can see, though, is there are even scriptures that demonize the place we call Kemet or Egypt today. And I'm glad the Sister Amma Bookman brought that up. And if we remember, at the very beginning of this conversation, Brother Dwayne Omowale mentioned excerpts from other books that talked about some of the key figures in the religious teachings, whether it's Abraham, Moses, even Jesus, that these people had to visit this place called Kemet. And then when they returned from Kemet, they seem to have these supernatural abilities. So why then does the same Bible call the Egyptians pagans, idol worshippers, and people who we can do anything we want to, when your most, should we say, outstanding figures in your book had to go there to study? I'm a very pragmatic type of person. We need to apply common sense. You can't on one hand say this place is demonic, but that same place is the place where even your Savior got his knowledge from. Yeah, basic ABC, you can see that there's something going on here that's not right. So my suggestion is The religion was colonized in its inception. It is part of the original story because it wasn't Africans writing that story. If we want to know the original African story, we have the literature from Kemet to, should we say, explore. But it doesn't make sense to me. Abraham, Moses, Jesus, there's someone else as well, but I've made an effort to make sure I fill my head with new information, not the Catholic upbringing that I had, so I can learn more. And as I said, we cannot demonize these people who went to this place called Egypt to learn and become, superhuman, for lack of a better word, and then still say that culture of that place is demonic. You don't need a scientific degree to understand that this is a big contradiction. Yeah. So for me, the religious faith was colonized at its very inception. Yeah, that's my contribution to that one.
Okay, I really want to move on. Unless Omawale, you really want to go.
Yeah, I just want to
feel
answer.
like the others answer for you.
I want to answer your question because you asked.
Very quickly.
I will. You asked, would it matter if Abraham was black? So first, I want to say that assuming I was to agree with the premise of the question, that meaning the premise being that Abraham existed and that this is not a mythology of a people, which I don't necessarily agree with. But if he were black, it tells me two things. One, it proves that the Asili or cultural practice embedded in the religion is not an African Asili. John Henry Clark had a good saying that he used to say about these three branches. He referred to them as male chauvinist murder cults. And the reason why I say that is when you look historically at African practices and concepts of spirituality, there's always that balance. There's the masculine and feminine, there's the male, the female. Those two principles, those two deities are always there in balance. So what you saw in ancient Kemet with the divinity being father, mother, child, that was replaced in the European context, and it became Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? So the removal, right, and the demotion of the feminine principle is something that is very not African. And I think a good modern example to look at that is if you look at the first adopters of the Islamic faith, the Fulani people who were nomadic and moved across the Sahel region and up into the Arabian Peninsula. When they embrace Islam, they become very anti-black, and they themselves are anti-black, right? They were these so-called slave raiders or frontiersmen for the caliphate. So it doesn't matter if you're black if you embrace a concept or a set of principles that is anti-black. So.
Okay, so we're 1 hour and 20 minutes in. We just hit topic one. So obviously we're going to skip some questions. If any of you see that I skipped a question and you really want it to be asked, you can, I'm talking to my panelists, you can message me in a private chat and I'll try to go back to it. But I'm going to go to topic two in a modern context. And the first question is, what are the major issues you identify with Abrahamic religions as they are practiced today? So who wants to start off with that one?
Do you know what, sis? Sorry, I don't want to preempt, or can I suggest, that the question about defining African spirituality is important and needs to be engaged. Humbly, I submit that.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, let's do that first, because I guess it will go into this next one. Let's keep it within 10 minutes, everyone. All right, go ahead. Shakara, you're going to lead on that.
Actually, I was going to defer to my brother Dalian if he's there, and coming after him as my elder brother. You know what I mean?
Yes, give thanks, brother Shakara. And apologies to anyone who might be watching the show who might think I'm a bit, should we say, for lack of a better word, maybe seem angry. I'm very passionate. I'm very passionate about this topic because, as I'm going to show you all evidence, as we're sitting here talking, there are people who call themselves Muslim, people who call themselves Hebrew Israelite, people who call themselves Christians, who are murdering people now in the name of their religion. And I'm not going to tell you something I believe. I'm going to show you the evidence. Because, you know, we're in the West where we have this kind of nice life and we can pontificate and think of things, but there's actual, atrocities happening against people while we pontificate on theory. So there's no anger here. Yeah, let me put a smile to it. Maybe it'll make you feel happier. But I'm passionate because people's lives are at stake for things we can't prove. Yeah, let's think of this carefully. People's lives are at stake every second for things we can't prove. So to me, it's a matter that's very dear to my heart. What is African spirituality? The most basic and, should I say, the most encompassing definition I've come across or can see from the 10 plus years we've done this work. African spirituality is life, because it is a superstructure that permeates and interconnects every aspect of our lived reality. Yes, so even when you have this, should we say, understanding of how you might work with elemental energies, there's also an aspect within African spirituality where we can draw from our knowledge in herbs and use that for healing. So it's not just about supernatural, whatever else. It's also about healing. Within African spirituality too, we can find education. Yes, we can find politics. So it is a superstructure of knowledge. It's a corpus that allows us to see the interconnectedness within all aspects of society and ourselves, which is why we have that spiritual concept of Ubuntu, that each and everything is connected and shared by elemental energy. So that's really the most basic and most succinct definition of African spirituality I can give. And even that doesn't do it justice. But in essence, it is life.
I'll add to that.
Okay,
so go.
I'm sorry.
I'll be very brief. I promise you, I'll be very brief, and I appreciate that you've got a difficult job. Yeah, so I don't want to make it any more difficult. But I think that it's an important question, because oftentimes we center critiques of the Abrahamic religions without centering the traditions that the Abrahamic religions have critiqued, right? And when we're having a conversation like this in terms of African people, I think it's important to deal with African spirituality. Spirituality is defined as a way of life steeped in reverence to the divine creator and the creation. Yeah. And so when we put African before that, we are specifically identifying the ways in which African people have developed culture in relation to our relationship with nature, in order to give expression to this way of life steeped in reverence to the divine creator and creation. I'm gonna pray on the wisdom of my brother Dalian in terms of identifying 5 key components of African spirituality. One is the understanding of the supreme creator, and that means that basically Africans, generally speaking, share commonality of understanding of what the creator is. Yeah, a relationship with the divine forces of nature. In other words, that reverence, a way of life steeped in reverence to the creator and the creation requires us to be in harmony and balance with the forces of nature, and we find various different ways of expressing that. And some of those ways are obvious in terms of things like the Orisha, the lower, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Then there's ancestorhood, which is essential, that there is veneration and reverence for our ancestors, both individual in terms of our personal line and our collective nationhood ancestors. African spirituality, generally speaking, shares similar rituals and what Brother Dalian calls invocationary practices. And then there is a shared understanding of the divine purpose, of the human soul or spirit and humanity. And so, like you said, that we can go into more details about those things, but that's a brief answer.
Thank you. Are we okay moving on? I agree with this definition. I think everyone agrees with this definition. Anyone have problems with it, or can we move to the next section? I don't want to. Okay, we're moving on, y'all. So let's go back to the question we were going to say. What are our thoughts, or what are our problems with the way that Abrahamic religions are applied to our modern context? Anyone who has not spoken in a while want to jump in first?
I'll go. I don't.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll get next.
All right. So a couple weeks ago, I started having a conversation about what was going on in Nigeria, and that was part of, some of this debate that we've been having online for the past 3 weeks. And I think Nigeria, for me, represents the problem of Abrahamic religion is that it shifts our center of gravity so that we don't know what is our Black problem and when to mind our own Black problems. And we have adopted the problems of other people. And aside from some of the awful violence that is occurring in the name of Islam at the highest level within the Nigerian government, there's a little bit of political public policy in Nigeria that I learned a while ago that I think speaks to people not minding their own Black problem and is sort of invested in things that are not happening within their own borders. The Nigerian government funds trips to Mecca and funds trips to Israel. You can get money from the government. This is a government that cannot build roads, that cannot build hospitals, that cannot build quality schools, but it can fund because their center of gravity is off of their land. Now, how much more would it mean for a nation like Nigeria to do what Israel does and says, hey, I've got Ife, which according to Ifa is the center of the world because religion deifies the culture that it's in. Imagine if instead we're going to Jerusalem and Mecca, we all felt like next year I am taking a trip to Ife. I want to stand next to the statue of Oduduwa. That is the consequence. That is our minds, hearts, and our money are all invested away from home in other people's problems. You have Igbos in Nigeria today who are cheering on the nation of Israel dominating the Palestinian instead of minding their own Black problems.
Okay, go ahead, Amawale. Then if everyone minds, I'll jump in after that.
And then I'll jump in after you.
I'm sorry, Amawale.
Yeah, I'm on Morale as well. Yeah,
I'll go after you, Terry.
it's fine. So in the groundings with my brothers, Walter Rodney made the point that he said African religions are by nature non-imperialistic, and what he meant by this is, unlike Abrahamic religions, African religions don't have this belief that there's a universally revealed truth that came down to us through a prophet and through holy books, and they don't have this belief that they need to go forward and convert other people to this view. So I think the biggest issue with Abrahamic religions in Africa, especially at the governmental level, is that we have so many Christian and Muslim political leaders who can't separate their religious beliefs from their politics. And this has been an ongoing issue in Nigeria, where so much of the public policy has been shaped by religion. And there's two specific examples I actually want to speak about. The first is an example from 2016. Lawmakers in Nigeria actually voted against the Women's Equality Bill, and the reasoning given behind this was because equal rights for women was, contrary to the Bible and contrary to Sharia law in Nigeria. So these are lawmakers who have made the decision that they can't uphold women's equality because of religious reasons. And the second issue that flows from this is not only are these political leaders using their religion to shape public policy, but there's a lot of hypocrisy as well. And these religious leaders, they don't even hold themselves to the same standard of religious laws that they impose on the people. And one example that I think is very striking came from a particular politician in Nigeria named Bukar Ibrahim. Now, when he was the governor of a particular state in Nigeria, he'd actually implemented Sharia law. And under Sharia law, the punishment for adultery is 100 lashes. Now, this same man who was willing to inflict Sharia law upon Nigerian citizens, he was caught in a scandal in which he was himself having an adulterous extramarital affair with two women. He was caught on video actually having this affair. And when he was caught, he didn't receive any 100 lashes. He simply went on social media and said he's a public figure and people should respect his privacy. So to me, that's the issue with Abrahamic religions in Africa, that these political leaders are willing to use these religions to impose very oppressive policies on their people, and they don't even hold themselves to the same standards. So you have, across the continent, so many so-called Christian and Muslim African leaders who regularly violate the very things that they claim that they believe in. And obviously Nigeria is it's becoming a very big issue in Nigeria, but we see these issues in countries like Uganda, we see these issues in Sudan, Zimbabwe has had these issues. So just all across the continent, we see just very religious leaders who, as I said, oppress the people, and they don't even hold themselves to the same moral standard that they claim to preach.
Okay, thanks. So my answer, first of all, So going back to my definition of when the religion became colonized, I believe that the religion became colonized when other Europeans, they had a thirst and a lust for power, they had a thirst and a lust for land. So with this ideology that they created, that Africans are inferior, they created a creed to go with it. Unfortunately, today, I think that the vast majority, and I really wish Brother Kalanji was on, or someone from an Islamic perspective was here to speak to their perspective on this, but I have to speak from my perspective. The vast majority of Christian churches, to me, are a colonized version of the faith. That is, they are one that endorses the white supremacist system. They are one that does not challenge it. And whenever they see it inflicting the most violence on people, they do not follow the teachings of Yeshua. Look at this prosperity gospel problem. That's something I can never reckon with, is how literally I cannot find one scripture, one saying of Yeshua where what is it? The idea that, oh, we're supposed to base your life on taking and having, and it's, you need to have, you need to get your money, get your blessing. That's not even true to the text. Although, despite that, a lot of our people instead inflicted or imposed into that their belief. So you have a lot of people running around trying to be rich and using the church to do it, using prayer to do it. The other thing that I cannot stand is just the weakness of the faith. There's a scripture in the Bible that says, I want to quote it exactly. It says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of those who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy." When I read that was Proverbs 31, 8-9. When I read a scripture like that and I see the silence for something like, not just the Palestinians, there's a long history of oppression, but this one is a little bit more different, I think, just because of how you have people literally using the biblical text to not have a position on this oppression, on the killings. It's to me, it's weak, it's spineless, it's not anything, it's doesn't have power. But I do want to say that while I think the vast majority, and I probably say like 95% of them do practice that type of belief that is colonized, I will leave room for those who are of a new school, who are working to decolonize. And I had that as a question, but I don't know if we'll get to it. But people who are going back and seeing that a lot of what we see when we read scripture, we're seeing with the colonizer eyes. We're not seeing from our own perspective. We're not applying it to our world. We're not in the belief that there's a God who loves us. We believe that he tolerates us. These are the unfortunate realities, and why I believe there's a real need to, and a sincerity from leaders who are not concerned with power and being close to this system, white supremacist system, is a real need to question and have authentic dialogue on how do we take this faith and make it potent, to taking care of the poor and caring for the needy, and condemning hoarding, condemning the capitalist system. How do we stay true to that meaning? So that's my perspective. I think we have was Brother Amole going first next, or
I was up to bat. Sister Tyranny, I love you. You know what I mean? You going to always be my sister, no matter what. I don't really care like what
I second that wholeheartedly.
Subscribe to. We all have our contradictions and limitations, including me. So none of us on this call are perfect Pan-Africanists, right, in any way. But just one quick correction to a statement that you made. You said that white supremacy came basically with white people, and that's not correct. White supremacy was actually embedded in the Islamic slave trade. I mean, from its very inception. I have a good document that you can read that talks about how they would differentiate between white slaves and black slaves via Mameluke and Abid, right? The term Abid, which they used to refer to black people, was actually synonymous with being a slave, but also all of the mythology of white supremacy about black people is already baked into the Arab slave trade. And it's important for us to know that this went on 1,400 years before the European slave trade was introduced via the Portuguese. And when it was introduced, the only thing that the Europeans added was they redirected the traffic across the Atlantic Ocean, right? Because the trade was already happening across the Sahel region, right? so across the Sahara. It was already happening on the east coast of the African continent, and it was already happening on the west coast. When the Moors conquered Spain, you had African people who were pagans being conquered or captured, right, during the annual slave raids and taken up, sold into Europe, or marched across the Sahara to be sold into the Arabic homeland. So it's important for us to start there. And then to answer your question, what are the major issues you identify with Abrahamic religions as they are practiced by African people today? It's two that nobody has really addressed yet. One, they render African people politically impotent, and two, they destroy our cultural self-esteem. So when I say they render us politically impotent, the way that works is you have somebody posted recently on Instagram that black people are waiting for, or people are waiting for the apocalypse rather than to make revolution. So the large majority of black people who practice these schools of thought are waiting for an army of people to appear out of the sky and to come and correct the affairs of men. And that renders us impotent because everything that we see around us is a so-called sign of the times, right? So we're just waiting on a savior or a messiah to return and correct what's been done to us over the past 2,000 years. So that's the first thing. And then in terms of it destroying our cultural self-esteem, I would just share my screen really quick, and this won't take long at all. What you see here on my screen, let me know, somebody just let me know when y'all can see it. So just give me a thumbs up if y'all can see it.
We can see it.
All right, cool. So recently, South Africa announced that they are going to have an Ancestors Day where they recognize and celebrate their ancestors. And the African Christian Democratic Party came out fervently, basically saying that we are against this day. And if you go down in the comments of all these Christians talking about, worshiping your ancestors is demonic and all these things. So what happens is when you destroy a people's cultural self-esteem, what they start to do is ascribe sacredness to other people's cultures and ancestors. And they look at their own as demonic and backwards because of what they've been taught by these religions about themselves, right? This is a really good poem that was written by Phyllis Wheatley, where she says, it's not a good poem, but she talks about, 'twas mercy that brought me from my pagan land, taught me my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a savior too, once our redemption neither sought nor knew. So this concept that before, Christianity or Islam intervened in the lives of African people, we were just backwards and just waiting for an external savior is one that's baked into these schools of thought. And I think that is the critical, issue that we must acknowledge. And even if someone wants to make the argument like Edward Wilmot Blyden made, that practicing Islam gives you a bit more of a martial force. Well, if we look all across the African continent, the British during the colonial period were able to rule through indirect rule because those who practice Islam, right, the different caliphates, the different Islamic caliphates that existed, saw themselves different than other black people. They saw other black people as pagan. Historically, and I'll stop here. This is just a good piece of information. When the Portuguese, which were the first Europeans to enter the slave trade, entered the trade, it's documented by the UNESCO that 2 of the first 10 Africans that they captured were ransomed. They were ransomed because they were Muslim. They were slave traders themselves, and they were able to basically attain their freedom. And in exchange, they gave 10 black pagans in exchange for the 2 Muslims, right? So from the very beginning, the large majority of us who are in the Western world are here because our ancestors were so-called pagans, right? So I think it's important. There were some Muslims who were captured as prisoners of war during the Crusades when the Europeans or Christians took back over Spain. And yes, some of them were enslaved, but some of them were able to ransom their freedom. But the large majority of us who were captured in the trade were captured and warred upon because we were so-called pagan. And that's important to remember and make you recognize how it destroys your sense of cultural esteem.
Yeah, and I've seen, you said 2 points in the end. I've seen in your first point, I've seen it with my own eyes. It's very true. The interpretation that we've been taught is that you should essentially not worry about the evils that are happening, that you should be uninvolved, that you should wait until you die to have any type of justice. That's something that is very perverse. That's something that has to be dealt with directly if we're going to have any type of movement towards freeing ourselves and freeing our people. This whole colonialism, capitalism stuff, every day I'm hearing things that break my heart, because not just because of the conditions that are happening with our people, but the fact that there's no fight coming from our people. And so that's a very important thing that I just wanted to highlight. Slank, were you next? Oh, Brother Delian?
I do have something to say, but I'll wait. Go on.
We gotta let the other side, you know, the other side, we gotta mix it out, like Terry said.
I think it's very synchronistic, Bravo Mwali, that you went with that point, because this takes me exactly where I also am, which is the answer to the question is that it encourages disconnection and disdain with any aspect of African/Black heritage. So the only thing it will foster is a lack of solidarity, because that's one of the things I loved about your question, Sister Tierney, which is that how can we look at ways in which we can find common means of moving forward for mutual benefit? But this is where the heavy duty aspect comes. As Bravo Mwali's just said, he put there and he showed you what the Black Christian section in South Africa said. Now I'm going to show you a video, because this is a long story. Yeah, it didn't just start with this South African one. First, I'm going to, can I share my screen, please? Sister Tierney?
That is my brother Randall. He's supposed to be handling that.
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah. If he lets me know when, I can go for it.
I think I can let you too. Let me see. Oh, I'm trying to figure that out. 1 second.
But meanwhile, I also set up the video so we can go straight in. Because
okay, while I'm setting up though, because we're going to play the video, I want Slink to
oh yes, let's now go on. Then I'll follow up with my point after. No, not a problem.
Yeah, I would agree mainly a lot with what Amwali said. I know Fanon has a passage in Register of the Earth where he talks about how like people can use religion and it can just be fatalism, and they're just waiting on you know, army out of the sky to come, you know, fix everything instead of acting themselves. And I think Fannie Lou Hamer used to say the same thing. So I mean, I pretty much agree with that point. I think I don't think religion is always used in that way, but I think that can be a major issue with it.
Okay, so he says that you have to share your screen. You have that ability.
Okay. Yep, I do have. I can see it. So first, I'm going to go with all these are short clips, yeah, not more than a minute. So don't worry, I'm not going to keep you here where we start thinking we're in some kind of movie theater. Okay, share screen. So first, let's just look, because I want us to start picking up some of the ideas which show us why perhaps our people struggle and will never be able to stand in solidarity with each other if we can't get over this kind of religious lock in our minds. Can everyone see my screen now? Someone let me know.
Yeah, we can see it, brother.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So this very short
Milk Stout is partnering with renowned cultural activist and poet laureate Zolani Mkiva and the Congress of Traditional Leaders of South Africa, Controlesa, to officially launch Ancestors Day on the 8th of May. Controlesa is calling on South Africans to celebrate and observe African spirituality and its role in our lives through ceremonies and rituals that honor the ancestors.
We didn't play the whole clip. I just gave you a little piece of it so that you could get an idea. But let me show you what is going on. All right? Satan is trying to get a grip on our nation.
Okay, so did you all hear the word Satan? Yeah, I need some feedback because I'm going to share you something else. You heard the word Satan. So you see straight away that there's this white man who is now already equating African people and their culture to Satan. And, you know, we might be easily led to think, oh, this is just a one-off. This has just happened now. Let's go back. I'm taking us all back to 2010 when the Haitian earthquake happened, because something very interesting happened then too. And let's note, at this point, there was no Black Muslim organization, Black Christian organization who came to stand in solidarity with these falsehoods that these guys were presenting. Can you all, my screen doesn't seem to work now. I just have this video to share, but nothing's coming up. Can someone help me out here?
All right, Randall, wherever you are.
It looks like we got like 12 minutes left, but I do know you're about to introduce Pat Robertson and referring to the Haitians, as worshiping the devil, which was
exactly. Thank you, Brother Mwali.
Yeah.
So I don't need to go there. So you have two people 10 years apart who have done what? Equated Black African people and their culture to who? A Satan or a devil. And then you might think, oh, okay, well, but that's nothing wrong. It might be non-factual. So where was the lack of the solidarity from our Black brothers and sisters? Can you all see my screen? Because I'm going to show you the impact of ignorance when we allow it to foster. So Pat Robinson made this ignorant speech, and then can we all see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Less than a couple of months after that, guess what happened? Haitians themselves turned on voodoo priests, rather, listen to me, even going funny with my pronunciations, and killed these people, claiming that the cholera outbreak and, of course, the earthquake was due to voodoo. But then guess what happened when a proper scientific investigation was done? We came to find out that it was actually caused by the UN peacekeeping force who had been brought into Haiti and just didn't have good hygiene habits. Yeah. So can you see how just one simple ignorant comment by some old decrepit white man leads to the death of at least 20 Black people who are totally innocent? But because we never stood up to challenge his ignorance, nobody stood up and said, you know what you're saying is a pile of crap. Somebody, if he said that about Islam, it will be hate speech. So let's go back to the very point Shakara said at the beginning. Somehow, everybody's religion gets respect, but ours, it's nobody really cares. So that's the only point I'm going to make. The issue I have is it will always foster a lack of Black solidarity unless the Black people can get over that doctrine that says, if you don't believe in my Jesus or my Muhammad, you're going to hell. So I don't need to have anything to do with you. That lack of solidarity will never help any of us. Because as you saw, those two white men, they weren't looking at whether you're just because you're a Christian, you become a human being. Your black skin still makes you the devil.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm not going to jump in, and
I'm not
going to try to get through the last section.
I won't be long. I do want to acknowledge the good intentions and the efforts of brothers and sisters in Abrahamic religions, who attempt to work on behalf of our people. I want to acknowledge, and Brother Omwali was in harmony with what was in my mind when he made the statement about yourself, Sister Tierney. You have fast become one of my favorite people and Pan-Africanists on the planet, and that is in spite of whatever faith that you profess. All right, and I want to acknowledge the Black liberation theology tradition, and all of the traditions of Black Islam, that have attempted to work on behalf of our people. Nothing that is being said here is an attempt to discredit that in its totality. But just in the same way that that in spite of me as an African spiritualist and doing work on behalf of Black people, is not going to change the mind of a Christian or a Muslim as to whether I'm going to heaven or Jannah or not. These critiques stand independently of those good intentions. So I want to make that very clear. I want to just add just a couple of examples. And the first is in 2011, consternation was caused in the Pan-African community worldwide because the Ghana government sought to ban libation at state functions, in Ghana. This is a tradition that was instituted by the Osage for Kwame Nkrumah as a way in which to foster unity among the people. State occasions began with Christian prayers, Muslim prayers, and the pouring of libation, particularly in the Ga tradition, because the capital city of Accra was founded by the Ga people. And in 2011, I believe it was 2011, and I could be a year or two off, but libation was banned. As of 2018, a debate was still taking place as to whether traditional African libation should be reinstituted at state functions. And I'm not even sure if that debate has been resolved to this day. And as an extension of that, I've been in occasions whereby people have tried to reflect that particular unity effort, and on occasions whereby there are Christians, Muslims, and African spiritualists involved. And on one occasion, an event was being planned. I forget, it was either Ghana Independence or Africa Liberation Day. And the Christians and the Muslims and African spiritualists were involved in planning of this event for a particular organization, which I won't name. But a debate ensued whereby the Christians were happy for the Muslim prayer to go ahead. The Muslims were happy for the Christian prayer to go ahead, but both were vehemently against, the libation being poured, to the point whereby no prayers or no libation, was performed, at the beginning of this event, because it couldn't be resolved. On another occasion, it happened. Everything was going nice. Everybody sat, and observed the Christian prayer respectfully. Muslim prayer came, everybody sat and observed it respectfully. Libation is being poured. People are literally running out of the room. Literally running out of the room. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because oftentimes, when we begin to talk about these subjects in the context of Pan-Africanism, the debate is framed in a way whereby Afrocentrics and Pan-Africanists are attacking people's religion without, and the dishonesty of that conversation is that it doesn't acknowledge that by far, by a country mile, as they say, the significant disparity in this dynamic is not traditionalists and Afrocentrics and Pan-Africanists, who are a minority anywhere in the African world, including the Caribbean. And we haven't even got into a lot of the dynamics in the Caribbean properly yet, right? But the fact that everywhere African people are, the majority of us are in the Abrahamic tradition, to the detriment and often the violent attack against our indigenous spiritual traditions. And the fact that even in Pan-African circles, we fail, whilst trying to promote unity, fail to acknowledge that reality, actually perpetuates the division that we say that we are against.
I think that's a great place to take it, because that's really the reason why I wanted to have this conversation. Clearly, this is not a conversation where I don't think any of us are of the idea that we're changing anyone's minds on anything. All of us are intelligent people. All of us have done our research. All of us have our convictions and our reason for why we're for it. I think that the thing that drove me to say, you know what, I think I do want to have this on my channel, because it's something I've played with for a while, is because I see both sides, Christians and African spiritualists, saying things that I think do become detrimental whenever we're moving as a people. So I'll give you an example, and you guys kind of brought out the examples. We'll start with the Christians, people who are questioning essentially what happened in Africa before Christianity or before Islam, people who are acting as if Africa was in the dark or the Stone Ages. Those things are a discredit to you, because you do not understand that you as a people, you have always had a relationship with God. It did not take even before Abraham. You've always had and I'm speaking obviously to people who are Christian. I understand 90% of y'all don't adhere to that. You've always had a relationship with the Creator. You've always had that relationship. So to assume or put these ideas on your people, your ancestors, it's something that I'm very disappointed with when I see it. On the other hand, I'll also say, I'm obviously Pan-Africanist, so overwhelmingly people who proclaim themselves to be Pan-Africanist today, I think, are people of the African spiritualist perspective. And by the way, I think that we have to go back, speaking again to people who adhere to Abrahamic religions, and understand that African spirituality translates to all African people. And you should not be of the mindset that that's something that you should not tap into. You'll find you'll get your power whenever you do tap into that aspect. But going aside from that, when I hear things that are a blanket statement, and I think that's why Twitter becomes or all social media becomes dangerous, because there's the idea of bringing up facts, research, and then there's the idea of casting broad strokes on different people. The one thing that got me into the conversation was when I seen a tweet, I think Dwayne responded to it. Someone actually said that you cannot be of an Abrahamic religion and be anti-imperialist. And I said, wow, do you say that with a straight face, considering all of the African people who have fought imperialism longer than we've all been alive, who have come from those faiths? Are you not also because the place we were going with this is because the ultimate purpose is organizing. I think for all of us on this panel, we understand that we have to organize with our people. Do you think that you can insult someone's belief, and that's something that's sacred, and still organize with those people? So that's the perspective I want to get on from everyone within this question. What do you do when you're organizing with African people who do not share your religious beliefs? So if you're someone, well, I'm the only one of an Abrahamic religion, so I guess those of you who aren't, if you're working with someone who's of an Abrahamic religion, what is your approach to dealing with that?
Yeah,
Dwayne, was this hand?
Yeah, I'll start. So, my approach in this, and it gets back to the topic of religion, because liberation, because I think the ultimate goal is liberation. And my personal view is, I don't really particularly care what someone practices in terms of religion, because when you look at our history, we've had people who are Christians, Muslims, people who practice traditional African spirituality and all different forms of beliefs that have worked for the liberation of African people, and individuals who practice all those beliefs that have worked against the interest of African people. And a point that I want to make earlier about make it here is that we have to be honest about African religion and African spirituality. And the fact is, African religions didn't protect us from being conquered and colonized. In fact, when you look at history of the slave trade, some African religions played a role in our subjugation. When you look at kingdoms such as Asante and Dahomey, they actually adopted certain religious practices that assisted with their role in the slave trade. For example, in Dahomey, there was an annual tradition of human sacrifice. So what the kingdom of Dahomey would do was to go out and to conquer, and engage in raids. Some of the captives would be sold into slavery. Some of the captives would be incorporated into the Dahomey's army, and the remaining captives would be sacrificed in a tradition in which they were sacrificed to the ancestors. I've done a lot of work in the struggle in Togo, and I can tell you for a fact, the dictatorship in Togo has used Christianity to subjugate its people. It's used Islam to subjugate the people, and it's even exploited traditional African religions such as voodoo to uphold its exploitation. There was an incident in 2017 which the dictatorship in Togo had actually used some of the local African traditionalists in a ritual to appease the spirits of the people who've been murdered by the dictatorship. And basically what they were doing was taking African spirituality and using that spirituality to cleanse itself of its sins. So instead of bringing to justice the people who'd actually engaged in these tortures and murders, they just brought a bunch of spiritualists, did a ceremony, and said, we've been cleansed. There's no need for justice. So my approach in it is, I judge an African based on their actions. What are you willing to do for the liberation of African people? What are you willing to sacrifice for that liberation? And when you look at history, I don't think there's a correlation between religion and that willingness to sacrifice and struggle for African people. And I always make the point, if we were on a slave plantation right now and Harriet Tubman was coming to liberate us, would you really sit down and have a debate and an argument with Harriet Tubman over the fact that she's a Christian, or would we follow her into liberation? And you could go down the list. Would this be an exchange we would be having with Marcus Garvey, or would we be working with Marcus Garvey to organize the UNIA? Would we be debating with Malcolm X over this, or would we be working with Malcolm to build his organization? So that's my view in it, and that's why I don't really like to get into religious debates, because at the end of the day, it's not really what you believe that's going to liberate African people. It's what you're willing to do to liberate African people.
Okay, who wants to go next?
Okay. So I think that having gone through numerous centuries of being colonized by not only Europeans, but Arabs, all of us are in the process of suffering from a certain amount of colonial baggage. Some of them are known to us and some of them are unknown to us. And so whether it's religion or some other aspect, I feel like there are ways that people within the Pan-Africanist community can challenge me, and we can always have these conversations. Doesn't mean that if there's a particular thing that we need to resist. So for example, Sister, you did some really good videos on what's happening in Kenya and them resisting the IMF loans. I'm not going to say, well, I'm not going to organize with people in Kenya who are resisting because they're Christians or Muslim or whatever. Like that's never on the table. That's not happening. And no part in this conversation do I think we should throw away anyone. But I do think as we move towards our liberation, we do have to talk about some of these ways that these things can compromise us. And I want to give like 2 historical examples of what I think is a confusion that happens to our people when we adopt these religions. And one of them will be from Islam, the other one will be Christian. And these are 2 early converts. One of them is the king of Borno. He writes to the Sultan of Egypt, the Sultan of Egypt, because they are continuing to raid his people and enslaving them. And he's confused. I'm a Muslim, you're a Muslim. I thought we were brothers, right? Because there's a way in which these religions have also been used to create a false solidarity with people who are essentially our enemies. We find the same kind of confusion with King Alfonso when he writes to the lead king of Portugal, because his people are being raided. And this is a famous letter in which he says, you know, our people are continuing to be raided, even members of our royal family. And what you see in his letter is also confusion. And so I think one of the things that happened, in addition to creating some sort of passivity in us, in some of us. Last time I was in church, they were singing a song called "We Don't Need a Revolution, We Need a Word from the Lord." We have to talk about how certain things, religion, hair from Asia, are compromising our full liberation while we continue to help each other and work together to become liberated. So the work continues. We work together. We love each other. There's nobody who should be cut off from the community because we disagree on this, but it doesn't mean that we don't have the conversation. Maybe we don't have the conversation when Harriet Tubman is taking us off the plantation, but it doesn't mean the conversation never occurs.
Gotcha.
Do we, I'm gonna go to you, but do we have the conversation in context? Meaning, I see suffering happen with my people all over the world. You guys know on my channel, I mean, I've mentioned I'm a Christian a few times, and that's not something that's the predominant focus of my channel. I focus on the suffering. I focus on trying to decolonize. I intentionally, as Malcolm said, make that my private life, because I understand, as we've seen in this panel and as we've seen that Twitter has had for 3 weeks almost, that these things do nothing to rid ourselves of the enslavement system. As Dwayne said, there's no correlation between either Abrahamic religions or African spirituality and people who have actually fought in our liberation struggle or done things for our people. So what I'm saying basically is, do we put those conversations in a certain place, or are you guys fine with, like, I actually have a problem with the fact that this is such a focus, whereas a lot of people aren't talking about things that actually are affecting them in their immediate life. Shakara, you can talk to that.
Yeah. Okay. I want to affirm, put it this way, if you are organizing, yeah, as a Pan-Africanist, right, in your community, there's no way you do that in the current context without having to work with brothers and sisters who are not African spiritualists, right? That's just the reality of the situation. Yeah, that is a material reality, and I think that because of that, we have to find ways to work, and I think for the most part we do. I'm loath though about this idea that religious debate is not important. We look at the past movements that were referenced before. Would I have debated with this Papa Garvey? Yes, I would have, because in as much as he facilitated these debates within the auspices of the UNIA, religious debate took place within the auspices of the UNIA, in and outside of convention. Brother Omawale mentioned Baba Wilmot Blyden, yeah, who wrote books on the subject of religion. Why? Because it was a subject of debate, right, and investigation among our people. So I think that I don't understand the logic of all of these other aspects of our lives are important towards our liberation effort, but this religion piece is not. Whereas religion is so central to so many people's lives, I don't understand that.
I thought you did.
Right? No, very quickly, because I again. The hindrance, what one comes with people that talk and are not organizing, Yes. But secondly, it also comes where we don't acknowledge the root of this problem. And the root of this problem is not Pan-Africanists condemning Abrahamic religions. The root of the problem is Abrahamic religions condemning African culture. And I think we have to seriously ask the question, is there African liberation? Sorry, are we African people without African culture? Is there African culture without African spirituality? And therefore, can we be a liberated people without the restoration of dignity and respect for our indigenous culture and our indigenous spiritual traditions within that context? Yeah. And so I think that we should engage the conversation. We should engage the debate, but we should seek to, as has been done here today, engage it with the spirit of respect and with the love of our people central to what we say and how we say it.
Okay, I see Amawale wants to jump in, but let me just very quickly say that I think you hit an important point, Shakara, that I'm trying to get at. I see a lot of, sorry y'all watching, a lot of Twitter fingers, a lot of people who don't work for the people, a lot of people who sit back and read books, but do have no organization, do nothing. This is all they want to talk about. And that's my problem, is that what are you doing to affect this situation that all of us are suffering? And that, for me, like, is the biggest takeaway when it comes to religion that I learned from Malcolm, is that we are all facing this system that doesn't care whether or not you're a Muslim, a Christian, or African spiritualist. They're coming for you. So that's what I was talking about specifically. But go ahead, Brother Amoy.
Appreciate you raising that point, Sister Tyranny. So when I look at this question where it states what principles should, and I'm assuming you mean Pan-African organizers, adhere to when encountering Africans who do not share their religious beliefs. For me, I feel like the premise in this question is one in which we look at religion as something that is immaterial. And one of the objectives or mandates of Afrocentricity, the organization that I'm a part of, besides rescuing aspects of African culture that have been demonized, or traditions and schools of thought and values that have been kind of like destroyed as a result of the Ma'afa, we also have a responsibility and a mandate to critique domination. And I tweeted this out the other day, that when it comes to the will of Black domination, every Black person has a spoke that they want left intact, right? They want to destroy the will of Black domination, but they don't want to touch the spoke of capitalism, or they don't want to touch the spoke of religion, or they don't want to touch the spoke of race. And the reality is, all of these things touch our lives in very material ways. So when we examine a religion is an organized system of thought. Like, there's no way of getting around that. So you wouldn't make the argument that it's immaterial to be in a Pan-African organization when someone is subscribing to the mythology of capitalism. They're subscribing to the beliefs that if they work harder, if they gain financial literacy, if they just learn and educate themselves, and they can change their material conditions. Well, for me, that mythology or that organized system of belief does not gel with the goals that I'm looking to achieve as it pertains to liberation. So for me, when I look through that lens, the way that I engage African people is, one, I seek to humanize all African people because we've been dehumanized. And then two, I respect them in spite of where they are, whatever practices that they are engaging in. But when it comes to my organizing, Dr. Asante teaches us that consciousness precedes unity, right? We have to have the same goals. And even under the banner of Pan-Africanism, Pan-Africanism is it's not an ideology. It's an objective that you use various ideologies to get to. And many of those ideologies do not agree with one another. I'm going to say it flat out. I'm not looking to organize or unify with somebody who is animated based upon gender or queer theory, and they believe that all norms need to be transgressed, or they believe that to be heterosexual needs to be marginalized and not be normal. I'm not organizing with anybody who's practicing a secular religion that is against the goal that I'm trying to achieve. Like, we all have a view of what liberation looks like. So within that view, you're not going to get all African people. That's not my concept of Pan-Africanism. Like this, it isn't a proselytizing force where everybody has to believe. But we do have to work across ethnic lines, across national borders, across languages to find people who adhere to the same principles that are working to bring about the same vision. Like, I tweeted the other day something about Pan-Africanism, and I had a black communist jump in my mentions like, oh, your Pan-Africanism has to do with race. Well, yeah, it does, because my Pan-Africanism is not about location. I'm not trying to organize the white invaders, the Arab invaders, and the black people who've been conquering it on the continent under one body. I'm talking about all black people across the spectrum, the globe. So these things matter. They are not immaterial. So how do I approach organizing our people? I'm organizing with people who've been politicized and are working towards the same stated goals as me. But when we interface with the community, I'm only trying to humanize, I'm trying to galvanize, inspire, and respect the people, regardless of where you are. But I'm not going to bring in a force that's going to divide when you need unity to move forward in any effort. And I can recognize that under the umbrella of Pan-Africanism, there is not unity in thought. So I'm okay with that. And so this is where I disagree with Malcolm. I don't think you leave those things in the closet. I think that they have to be interrogated. I think that we have to examine the different assumptions that are baked into each of these thoughts and agree, do they get us to the goal? And we even have to agree on the goal. But if we say we're just going to throw this thing, in the closet and unify for the purpose of unification, that doesn't work. That's a limitation and a contradiction that doesn't get us to freedom. And lastly, I'm going to close one sentence from Jacob Carruthers. I don't need to say anything else, but I agree with this. In Intellectual Warfare, he wrote that a restoration of African civilization is not possible without a return to African spirituality, meaning without a return to our core of who we are. And you don't get that while practicing these other traditions that are anti-you and that are given to you so that you can believe that your lot on earth is something that has been divinely ordained and will be divinely corrected. I can't subscribe to that.
Okay, so I'm sorry, y'all, I'm texting at the same time. I think we're on Brother Slink. Are you? I've lost count, y'all. Or Delian, one of them, whichever one you want to go.
Slink can go first. I'm easy.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, I would say I don't think it's an issue organizing people of different religions as long as the end goal and as liberation, basically. I think Kwame Ture talked about this in his autobiography, how he didn't particularly adhere to Christianity, but so much of the organizing was done at the time in churches and things that he had to learn to not just spend all his time going against the beliefs that most of the people he was trying to organize held. And I think Kwame Nkrumah also, he has a really good passage about how the reality is there's three different faces of Africa: the traditional, the Islamic, and the Western Christian, I think he said, and how we have to use Africa's humanist principles of and tolerant principles to find a harmony to have these three coexist. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
I mean, I do want to insert in there for you to answer to Brother Elian, is that I'm of the belief that if you're of an Abrahamic religion, you can also be of practice African spirituality. And it's also not for anyone to tell you that you can't, honestly, because that's a personal relationship. That's what I think Malcolm was saying. Your relationship with your God is personal. Now, I'm not saying you could practice African religions. I look at African spirituality as how I look at my people fighting for a liberation, how we were always spiritually minded, that God does love us, that the creator was on our side, and that was going to be our motivating force to engage the oppressor. So I want to throw out there for you, Brother Dalian, is throw that out there, and also ask you your perspective. Do you feel like, what is your perspective on organizing with people who are of other religions?
Hey, Sister Tierney, lovely questions. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you half of the question probably just went out the other ear there, but I get the general gist, and we'll break it down in steps. What principles should African organizers adhere to when encountering Africans who do not share religious beliefs? And the first place I'm going to start with, because context is very important, and Shakara has already alluded to this, whereby really African-centered activists, scholars are being gaslighted now to almost act like they are the perpetrators of attacks on those who are the religiously minded. Firstly, I've shown you evidence that this is going on at a systemic and institutional level. And also, those of our Black family who seem to think that because they are of the religion, they will get better treatment. As we can see, I showed you 2 white men speaking 10 years apart, who all use the same word to describe Blackness or Africanness, that you're the devil. So really what we can see is it doesn't matter whether you are a Black practicing religious person, because, actually, in that case, maybe what you can do is you can be the one who wipes their feet, or, take their dog for a walk. You will still be a servant. There is no parity in those systems for any of us. Shakara will testify to this because he was there when I launched the book. He's already given us the example. When you're even having organization around African Liberation Day, and you have people who are highly educated, highly sensible, understand the nature of, I call it white juju, I don't call it white supremacy anymore, because we need to start reframing. What we're dealing with is a high levels of psychological manipulation and priming. Yeah? We paid a woman to come and film at a book signing that we done. I don't think the organizer had told the woman exactly what the event was. And when she got there, she decided that she could not be in the same room as the libation pouring. This is a Black person who has come on a job hired as a professional, but yet her religious belief could obstruct that. So let's get this thing very clearly. Me, I'm open to working with any Black person who has the right mindset that can understand that we don't need to agree on everything, but we can still achieve a mutually beneficial common objective. I already told you again, I'm a pragmatist. Let me give you an example. In the UK now, and in England, there's a lot of cuts from the government. Yeah. So a lot of youth centers got closed. There's a lot of empty buildings around. You could say, I'm from the church. I'm from this Pan-African organization. Let's pull our money together and purchase this building. Yeah. You can use it on Sunday for your services. I can use it on Sunday for my Sabbath because I'm Hebrew Israelite. We can have evening classes for our young people so they're not on the road getting killed. This is just basic common sense. You don't need to get into any form of high level, should we say, brainstorming. It is basically simple. I'm ever ready to work with everybody. Look, they showed my film at one of the highest national institutions here, the British Film Institute. And yet half of the room stood up and walked out. That is religious discrimination by Black people on other Black people. I could list for you a whole list. Me, I'm open to work. You go and you speak to people. Oh, you're one of those juju people. Conversation done. So if your religious belief is going to affect your ability to reason on a basic common sense level, you can't put that responsibility on me. I'm ready to do the work. The question is, can you get over your falsified consciousness enough to say, you know what, we can actually find mutually beneficial commonality in doing something? Shakara gave the other example, Ghana's former president. How can a president decide to ban
a cultural act in a so-called democratic country. Sister Amma gave the examples. It's not only Nigeria that funds these religious pilgrimages. Ghana does it too. You tell me if they've even given $10,000 to lay the foundation for a traditional shrine that can serve as a kind of cultural archive. When we're having these discussions, please, we need to be honest. Maybe I can understand that maybe some of us might not know, but as I've shown you, all the way from Brazil down to East Africa, there are people killing other Africans in the name of religion. And I'll just leave us with this, because this point is very key. Even during our enslavement, there were only 4 places where Black people could exercise full autonomy of themselves. And in these places, nobody practiced any other thing apart from the cultural liberty of Africans, which we can call African spirituality. And as I've already mentioned, this is not a kind of just a religious thing. It's part of the whole society. The first place was a place in Brazil called Palmares, and it was autonomous for over 100 years. Let's think of that, you know. That means there were people born in the Americas who were never enslaved. And this Palmares place only was an African liberty. Let's jump to Jamaica. Jamaica has 2 maroon sovereign areas which remain sovereign today. They weren't practicing no religion. Let's jump just to the place we now call Suriname, where there's also a sovereign state of people who or extended the Akan culture over there. Yeah. And then there's another 4th place, but let me remind myself what that is. Shakara might be able to.
Are they speaking of Haiti? But that
of course, and Haiti gave us a whole nation. Yeah. So as I said, I don't want to talk about how I feel. No. Let's talk about what's actually happening. Let's talk about what we can prove, and let's identify what is causing these actions to happen and deal with them appropriately. But I reject any suggestion that is Afrocentrics who are the ones who are attacking and making other Black religious people feel uncomfortable. That's gaslighting. I've given you evidence. We need to you see, if we don't have honest debates, nothing will ever change. Our debates need to be honest and based on actual, accurate facts. Yeah, as I said.
I want to wrap up. Are you saying that I said that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, first of all, let's be clear. I agree with every example that you gave of oppression of African spirituality. What I'm telling you, because we're here to organize, is that there are things that become helpful, constructive, and then there are things that become difficult and disunifying. So what I'm saying is that both sides have done this. Now I'm talking about conversation. We're not talking about the oppression of African people. And that is something that I will concede. This is overwhelmingly done when it comes to murder and violence and those types of things. But we're talking about the discussion, particularly in the organizing world. I'm not talking about people on the ground. That's something that has to be differentiated. And I still stand by that we both sides, I've seen both sides say things that are hurtful to the cause. That's what I'm saying.
I agree. Yes. No, but Sister Tierney, you see, the point will still come back to it. As you can see, look, Brother Shakara, Brother Mwale, they're working with you because you're both willing to see beyond. We're willing to see beyond whatever the construct that we believe in, to understand that any type of be it mistreatment or even our success is between us. We are the ones who have to make that happen, which means we have no choice but to work with each other.
Sister Tyranny.
I agree. We're going to wrap up, but you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to I don't think that there's ever been a point in the history of our struggle where a systemic analysis or a critique of any, systemic thought has been off the table. And this goes to the point that actually raised this entire issue. Brother Slink had posted something on Twitter. Now, we're not going to be able to get to the John Henry Clark and Chancellor Williams, what I refer to as slander, but the initial thing that he posted that started this whole conversation, where he said that Pan-Africanists have all the respect for Malcolm, but disrespect his Islam. Well, I think it's very important to note how Malcolm arrived at Islam through an analysis and critique of Christianity, right? The Honorable Elijah Muhammad had made the statement that if Christianity was a wet cloth, if you drained it out, every drop of it would right slavery. So the theology of the Nation of Islam taught that Christianity was the white man's religion and here to enslave us, and that Islam was the black man's religion. So when we are giving a analysis of the systemic beliefs and mythology of Islam, it isn't being anti-Islamic. It's saying, hey, Malcolm and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad were wrong here. This is the history of Islam as it relates to our people, and it is on par, if not far greater, than the history of Christianity. And like that.
Here's my issue with what you're saying, because I understand what you're saying. Malcolm came from a critique of Christianity, right? But what if Malcolm did have a fuller understanding of the history of Arab enslavement? Does that change Malcolm for everyone? It wasn't before Malcolm's death that full understanding, and this is the conversation that me and you, Brother Dwayne, had. It wasn't synthesized in his political thought, and the reason why is because even the month that before he transitioned, Malcolm is giving an interview, and you can find this in Malcolm X's speeches, where he talked about how his travel to the African continent problematized his assessment of what black nationalism was. And he basically stated, now I'm still trying to figure that out, but I haven't quite figured it out yet. And my argument is this. There was a stat that came out recently related to money. And the stat was that within the last 12 months, 40% of the money that has ever been in circulation has been produced. But when we look at knowledge production, the knowledge that we have post Malcolm X regarding the history, Malcolm isn't allowed to arrive at certain conclusions. But one of the things that gives me hope that he will is in his letter from Mecca. Malcolm says that an open mind is necessary for all intelligent search for truth. An open mind is anathema to religious belief because it requires the suspension of disbelief. It requires the opposite of an open mind. So I think that with him assessing those historical facts, he will arrive at this conclusion that no, Christianity isn't the so-called white man's religion, and Islam isn't the black religion. Both of these Abrahamic traditions have played a role in the enslavement and dehumanization of black people. But what I'm trying to, because this is going to, I don't want us to go down this rabbit hole.
When you start touching on Malcolm, like, it gets personal.
Trying to stay on
Can I make a point to Malcolm though? Because I want to make this point because I think it's a big misconception that people have of Malcolm. Malcolm not only knew about the Arab slave trade, he supported the African uprising in Zanzibar. That was an African revolution against the Arab slave traders in Zanzibar. So Malcolm's position was.
Would you point to, Brother Dwayne?
Let him finish. I want to hear what he's going to say.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is, Malcolm was aware of this. The reason why he was a Muslim, it was very personal to him and his circumstances and his experiences. But when it came to the African Revolution, Malcolm was first and foremost a Pan-African nationalist. And in a situation where there was an African uprising against Arab slave traders, Malcolm was unequivocal in his support for the African revolutionaries against the Arab slave traders. So, that's a misconception I see by Malcolm a lot. I just want to make the point that he knew about the Arab slave trade and he was on the side of the African revolutionaries.
It's not a misconception, and this is why I point to when we were having the conversation about the final synthesis of his analysis never occurred, because what you pointed to in terms of his awareness of the Arab slave trade, you point to the debate that he had with Jimmy Baldwin or James Baldwin during his time and the Nation of Islam. Well, also during his time at the Nation of Islam, he had already made Hajj to Mecca. He already knew that there were like white Muslims, but post coming back from Mecca,
he wasn't in Mecca. He was in Arabia, but he didn't go to Mecca yet.
Talking each other.
He knew that there were white Muslims who practiced Islam, but where he was when he came back from Mecca, he made this notion that before this, I never knew that there were white Muslims. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the role of Arab slavery was never baked into his analysis, because when he was rebutting James Baldwin, he was doing so as he was engaged in a debate and doing so as a minister of the Nation of Islam. That knowledge was never then taken post the Nation of Islam, where he's trying to move in a different direction and baked into his so-called nationalist analysis. Like it never got fully developed. That's
okay. I'm gonna let Dwayne respond because that's supposed to be a debate, but it's turning to mine. I'm gonna let Dwayne respond. I'm gonna put a little something in there. Then Shaka Ra is gonna end this topic, and we're all gonna give our final thoughts.
It was just a quick response, but my thing is, I don't know how you can make that statement if Malcolm is actually supporting an actual revolution against Arab, slave traders. I mean, I don't know how you're making that statement when the brother is actually supporting a real revolution. And here we're having an academic discussion, and Malcolm was dealing with real, bloody revolutions and uprisings. So that's my position on that.
The statement is made just based upon the simple fact that Malcolm's embrace or abandoning, well, he was an atheist at that point, but his preaching of the doctrine that Christianity was the white man's religion and that Islam was the black man's true religion. His embrace of traditional Islam comes after his break with the NOI, but that initial premises of why he went to Islam was never subsequently addressed post his time in the Nation of Islam. And that's material.
I want to throw this in there. Who cares? The point I'm trying to get us to get to, this if is a if, not saying it is or isn't. Even if he knew and he still decided that Islam was his faith, he's still Malcolm to me. And that's really where I want us to kind of end this, because we're trying to talk about, in closing, because the whole point was talking about organizing with people who don't believe what you believe. If Malcolm knew the whole history of Islam and was still did what he did, built what he built, was building the organization of Afro-American unity, well, I know him because of Black liberation. I don't know him from his faith. I don't know him from what he from his trip to Mecca. I know him from what he did for African people, and that's where I want us to close it. But I'm gonna Shaka Ra really quick.
Very quickly, I take Malcolm very personally, Papa Omowale. And this is another thing, when it comes to the hyper valorization, as Mambo Ama refers to it, of other people's cultures, we do things like flag up European names and Arabic names and forget that the man had an African name. But we give thanks that there are two brothers on the panel that have that name as an inspiration from him himself. I do want to say that if I remember rightly, the speech that he mentions, the Zanzibar Revolution, and Muhammad Babu is the prospect for freedom. In 1965, which was delivered in January of 1965, and he says Zanzibar had a revolution, and the audience claps, right? So I acknowledge that. I also acknowledge, however, that in the aims and objectives of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, under the heading of establishment, it says, upon this establishment, the Afro-American people will launch a cultural revolution which will provide the means for restoring our identity, that we might rejoin our brothers and sisters on the African continent culturally, psychologically, economically, and share with them the sweet fruits of freedom from oppression and the independence of racist governments. Why am I reading that? Because of the emphasis on cultural revolution. And part of what happens sometimes in these conversations is that people reduce African culture to maybe some dancing, some food, maybe a language, but they divorce language from worldview. Right? Drumming, right? You know what I'm saying? But so if we say language in as much, but not language in as much as it informs the philosophy. We don't understand the role that language plays in a culture, But we want to replace how African culture can inform politics and economics. We want to replace that with other things, socialism or Abrahamic religions, right? That happens too, So we want to void the culture of the substance, the philosophy, the ideation. Right, and these in the hypervalorization of other cultures, and I'm saying that Omowale Malcolm X, had at least what we do know, had an insight into the importance of culture and cultural revolution, and who knows, where that would have taken him. All right, like it has taken many of us. Who knows where it would have taken him? So to answer your question more directly, Sister Tierney, there is not a time when I pour libation that I don't pour libation to Omawale Malcolm X. In fact, it would be considered sacrilege not to do so. Yeah, coming from my perspective, right? So we don't have an aversion to our ancestors to profess certain faiths, but we also don't valorize them simply because of the faith, and like many Black Muslims do, attempt to reduce and negate and neutralize his Black nationalism for the sake of Islamic proselytization.
I agree with that. Perfect into this topic and perfect time to wrap up. All right, everyone. So I think a good way to wrap up. Did you learn anything, and what do you want the audience to take away? Whoever wants to start, go ahead.
I'll start. So is the questions to take away specifically, did we learn anything? And what do I want? Okay.
Did you learn anything helpful for our?
Sure, I definitely, learned some things about, in terms of historical facts from, the whole team. I think we've proved here that we can have this conversation, and I'm very grateful that you have organized this and have had the conversation. And I think, as we've, discussed, Brother Malcolm, one of the things I wanted to say quickly about that is we are not free as a people. And so anything that our ancestors who we venerate have done have not necessarily brought us to the finish line. And we are in a continual process of understanding the systems that continue to oppress us. And so I don't see any contradiction between those venerations and also challenging and thinking about how we can think about things differently than we have in the past. And I do think one of the things we want to think about differently is this. So I want to end by quoting Afrocentrist Dr. Ben, who said, "Religion is a deification of people's culture." I think this might have been mentioned before, but I think it bears restating. "Therefore, religion empowers the people whose culture the religion is expressed." So often I get from African Christians or African Muslim, when they're practicing this religion here and that religion there, and they're not experiencing these things we are. But I think, as I hope I've outlined, is that the religion is designed to empower the specific people whose ancestors it is valorizing, right? And so to the extent that you're participating in it, even if that religion were itself benign, you are valorizing somebody else's ancestor. I think for me, the mind trick is that we have been compelled to venerate other people's ancestors while being told that ancestor veneration is evil and demonic.
So I'll give mine. So one, I've learned something, I'd say, from my African, I don't want to say African spiritualist, because I am of the belief that you can practice African spirituality even if you're of Abrahamic religion. But those of you who practice traditional African religions, I realize that a lot of the conversation is being stemmed from you feeling the oppression of the white supremacist system being utilized through Abrahamic faiths, and that's something that wasn't clear to me before. I also realized that, which I wasn't aware of either, that I didn't know what we started colonization at the inception of the scripture. So that's something new that I've learned. As far as takeaways, I think that I hope for people who are watching, I'm always going to tell you guys, I hope you're in organizations and that you're working. And I hope that you've learned that you can have conversations about issues, but keep those conversations helpful to the struggle. If you're not doing anything for the struggle, then please get involved with the struggle, because that is the thing that we have. That's the commonality we have. Like I said, if I'm walking down the street, they don't know what faith I am. They don't know what I do. They see me and I'm an African and they target me. And that should be the reason why we get up every day and say, you know what can I do for my people? Because this system is unrelenting. So that's my end. Anyone else want to jump in? Dylan, you look like you got something to say.
Yeah, I didn't even realize I didn't have my mic on mute, and I was saying that's it. But I totally agree with you, because I at the end of the day, like in England, the police code for a black person is IC3. You know, they won't stop you and say, hey, IC3 Muslim, I only give you a slap in the face. Oh, IC3 Christian, because you're Christian like me,
I won't do X, Y, Z to you. We all know what it is. It's very superficial and it's our skin color. What I've learned from this is that perhaps there is actually a willingness now among Black folk to actually just get a modicum of understanding, a little bit of understanding about what African spirituality is beyond what their scriptures tell them or what their parents and their parents before them have conditioned them to believe. Yeah, because no one is forcing anybody. As Brother Omowale says, we don't do proselytization here. Yeah, and everybody, whether they know it or not, is an African spiritualist anyway, because as I gave you that definition, it's about life. And we all see that everyone practices that again, because I'll tell you what, when this corona thing first started, did you see that herbal inhalation bath that started going around and everyone was sharing, everyone started doing it? A little something with a little lemon, a little something with clove, maybe with neem. These are all herbal remedies that are time-honored traditions. Yeah, so this is why I gave you my first definition. We're not here just dealing with some invisible power that we don't see. We access that power through even the very food we eat, because it's that food that gives us the sustenance. Yeah, we don't get to dinner time and some man appears out of the sky and says, here's your food. No, the food is outside. You can buy it. Yeah, so what I've seen anyway, despite all these years of just insults, because that's what largely we've received from most religious aspects of the Black community. And it's not even that in a sense it's made me vengeful or anything like that. What it's actually shown me is that there's a conflict, a mental conflict that is constantly going on within the African mind. And when that corona epidemic started and all of a sudden everybody wanted herbal solutions, I realized that, you know what, all people want to do is to, attach themselves to something that they think is of some substance. Yeah, herbal pharmacy is extensive. It's all part of the same traditions. Yes, in the same way that all of us here might know about, let's say, this scientific project happening in Europe, the CERN cylinder. We're not scientists, but you know about it. So at least just know a little basic about African spirituality. So when you see this Afrikaans coming on TV telling you that your African culture is demonic, you don't get a whole church institution releasing press releases that, oh, they agree that there shouldn't be an ancestral day. That's an embarrassing thing to do. And I tell you what, the more we keep embarrassing ourselves is directly related also to the degree to which people keep treating us, mistreating us. Do you understand? It's that simple. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, brother. Go ahead, Brother Slank.
Oh.
Yeah, I would just mainly just want to say that I feel like Abrahamic religions and traditional African religions can both be used negatively or positively. There's not an inherent one way either one of them is used, but and I just want to emphasize that specifically with Islam throughout Africa and throughout enslavement in the Americas, it was used revolutionary as a positive force in many revolts in Bahia, Brazil, for instance. And it wasn't a thing where they were exclusionary of other faiths or other people. Like in Brazil, it wasn't only the Malis that were part of this revolt. There was other ethnic groups and other spiritual traditions. So yeah, that's basically it.
All right, and Brother Shakara, you look like you want to go next. Go ahead.
I'm good, sis. Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, Creative Life Force of the universe. Kudzai Mudzimu Mukuru, give praise unto our great ancestors. And Tatenda, thank you very much to Tiani Cherie, for hosting this conversation. And not just hosting it, but doing a very difficult job. of basically, of trying to facilitate these very passionate individuals. We appreciate you, and all of us will be gone from this earth or in the physical at some point. But I have a feeling that my children will have cause to pour libation to the name Teodi Shari in the future. So we give thanks for you and your work and your energy. All right. I want to close by just letting the words of a few ancestors speak. First of all, throw away the image of the white man's God who thirsts for our tears, and listen to the God of liberty that speaks ill on our heart. I want to that's coming from Baba Bookman Dutty, who our sister Amma is aptly named after, even though some of our Muslim brothers and sisters are trying to claim our ancestor. I'm saying, bear in mind that particular prayer was said at a Vudan's ceremony. Just want to point that out, kings and queens. Secondly, Baba Amil Kakabral, and I'm saying this partly because we have some challenges among African spiritualists as well, in the sense of the fact that there are many people who are trying to consciously or unconsciously to depoliticize African spirituality, and so that it cannot be used as a revolutionary tool. And I want to make this say this from Baba Amil Kakabral. He says, to take up arms to dominate a people is above all to take up arms to destroy, or at least neutralize, to paralyze its cultural life. For as long as there continues to exist a part of these people retaining their own cultural life, foreign domination cannot be sure of its perpetuation. At any moment, depending on internal and external factors determining the evolution of the society in question, cultural resistance indestructible may take up new forms, political, economic, armed, in order fully to contest foreign domination. Statements that are not often quoted from our great ancestor. I want to say that this particular book, Destruction of Black Civilization, is a masterpiece. I encourage brothers and sisters to read it, and not projecting it as an anti-Muslim manifesto, because it is not. And you're doing a disservice to this particular ancestor when you characterize it in that kind of way. And finally, words that will inform all of us, because I feel like we need some direction, and this is a process. Liberation is not an event, it's a process. And the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, in this particular book, Message to the People, The Course of African Philosophy, says the following words. It is not necessary for or binding, it is necessary for the Negro, the African, to pay close attention to developing the appreciation for institutional life. It is not necessary or binding that he copies completely the systems, methods, or manners of these institutions, except insofar as they would go to help him to promote a higher life and in accomplishing the most out of this organized society. It is incumbent upon him that he also have and control his own institutions based upon his own cultural and civilized idealisms. As for instance, he may have his own church, but it is not necessary for him to adopt the peculiar articles of faith of the churches of alien races. He is not a Hebrew. Therefore, he would not adopt the Hebrew faith. He is not by origin a Roman Catholic nor an Anglican, because these faiths or religions were founded by white men with an idea of their own. In his religious philosophy, the Negro may safely adopt articles of faith to link him with the Godhead of the Christian faith and practice such as his particular religion, and so likewise with all other institutions. Why am I reading that? Like I said, we're all on a journey. We're all at different points in that journey. The only thing I can do, I would love all Africans, to reclaim our African spiritual traditions and affirm them and build institutions around them. But we're on a journey. So I would encourage all of us, wherever we are, to Africanize whatever spiritual focus that you're in. If you're a Christian, at least attempt to Africanize your Christianity and see what journey that takes you on and see where that takes you. And the same if you're a Muslim or a Hebrew or whatever. Tenda mwari, mwari mukuru, ashe, ashe, ashe.
Hey, I posted a comment for everyone. They're asking if you could put in the chat where they can find you. So please, if you can do that, everyone. Let's go Dwayne Omawale and then Omawale Africa to close us out.
I mean, I don't have much to add other than I hope it's been a very informative discussion, and that everyone who's watching took away something from this debate that they had probably not known before or had not considered before. That's all I want to add.
Thank you. Go ahead, Omawale Africa.
Sister Tyranny, as always, we appreciate you. And like my brother Shakara said, my kids will be taught your name. You know what I mean? So that when they do give libations and we're no longer here, their kids and their kids will definitely call upon your name. So hopefully they don't got a firewall in white heaven that's like, nope. Like you not getting it.
Don't start. We're trying to end on a good note.
All right, I'm sorry.
Black heaven.
All right, no, but in all seriousness, I just want to correct one thing. A statement was made that both Abrahamic religions and African traditional religions have all been used to do harm to Black people. And I think that we have to reject the premise that there is an equivalence between the two. There is nothing baked into African spirituality that justifies our dispossession and enslavement across the board based upon us being pagan. That is baked into each of the Abrahamic traditions. So we can't have this false equivalency that they are the same. And what I want to leave our people with is, I really believe in our ability for change. But in order for us to truly enact change, we are going to have to stop individualizing and personalizing our assessments of systemic thought. And when it comes to religion, it seems to be the only school of systemized thought that we are not allowed to give a systemic analysis. And I think it's important for us to be able to do it because there's a long trajectory of our people in relation to these different religions, especially in the diaspora. So if you understand history, then you understand that at the close of the 19th century, the large majority of African people in the diaspora were not of the Christian faith. It's important for us to understand that, right? In fact, white people didn't start to attempt to proselytize. They didn't create their American mission societies to go down into Little Africa or into slave country to try to convert Black people until after 1804 as a result of the Haitian Revolution and the role that African spirituality played in that revolution. So you get this book, 1804, 1863, the religious instruction of the Negro. But more importantly, in 1890, you get the Mohawk Conference, where former President Rutherford B. Hayes states plainly that the majority of Black people in slave country are practicing some form of voodooism or paganism, and he saw that as a threat to America's national security. So they needed to be Christianized. So the Christianization that happens to our people largely happens during the 20th century. And why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is so important, because without the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, you don't have a movement of Black Muslims in the United States and in the diaspora the way that you have it. Why is that? Because as a result of that movement and because of his systemic critique of Christianity, he made Black people look to an alternative. He told Black people that, hey, this is not your religion. This is the Black man's religion. And the religion that he gave them was not Eastern Islam. He created, it was an act of self-determination. So regardless of the limitations or contradictions that were in it, he tried to create something that was unique for them. And it's as a result of Malcolm X being a minister of the Nation of Islam and his conversion to Islam that many people from our generation, you got basketball players, Stat 5, all these people picking up his book and saying, hey, I'm going to convert to Islam because they think that's a part of our liberation, right? So I only point that out to say that just as we didn't end off the 19th century Christianized, only a small minority of us were Christians at the end of the 19th century. And just as in the 20th century, a portion of us were able to look at Christianity and critique it and say, oh, no, we need to go somewhere else. I think that we need to have that same systematic analysis of all Abrahamic religions and continue to walk back, right, that practice of Sankofa until we get to our cultural core from which we can launch true liberation and attain true African sovereignty. So that's what I want to leave with the people.
And that's the note that we're leaving off on. Everyone, I thank you for watching. Number one, you see their information. It should be inside of the chat. Please follow these people. Also, make sure you go back. There's a lot of information thrown at you. So the thing is supposed to be continuous. We're always researching. We're always learning. And so that's the ultimate goal for our people. And most importantly, please make sure that you are involved with this movement for liberation. I think every single one of our panelists will agree with that. So with that, I will see you all in the next broadcast.